Okay, so just welcome everybody to the meeting. Just to provide a bit of a brief overview of today's business. So we're going to have officials from the department and the Public Health Agency before us, and they're going to brief the committee on the Public Health Bill. We'll also have officials from the department to brief us on the autism strategy. The committee is going to then consider an SL1 on the health and personnel social services, optical charges and payments. And then the Assembly Research Services are going to be presenting a brief on the access to palliative care services. So that's our business for today. So meetings open to the public. Just to advise members that the committee will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. And just to advise everybody in the public gallery that they're welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and muted, and they can connect to the Assembly Wi-Fi. Password details are available on the gallery rules. It's not permitted to take photographs or record any of the meeting. So, apologies. Linda Dillon has given her apologies. Nobody else? No. Okay, and we have Dan who will be joining us by video conference. Dan, you can hear us and see us okay? Okay, thank you. Just then, in terms of Chair's business, can I just thank the staff of the Marie Curie Hospice for the committee's extremely informative visit to their premises earlier today to discuss issues relating to our inquiry into hospice and palliative care. It was, as all of these visits are, it was extremely informative, and we want to thank them for the welcome and for showing us what they do, the importance of what they do, and around the hospice. Can I also thank the staff similarly of the Children's Hospice for welcoming the committee to their premises last Thursday. Again, it showed valuable insight into the work, the vital work that they do. Just to inform members that I had an informal video meeting with the chair of the NI Affairs Committee earlier in this week, just in relation to a possible committee meeting in Westminster in May. So the committee team is currently working on the programme for the visit. We've potentially had a few technical difficulties in terms of what we may or may not be able to do there, but we're still in discussion, so I'll come back to the committee with all of that flagged up. And then just lastly, in terms of Chair's business, so everybody will be aware that last week's announcement of the commencement of the build of the new Children's Hospital was announced on the same day as our meeting, so we didn't have a chance to raise it at our last committee meeting. So, I mean, I'm hoping that just given the genuine concern maybe out there with some similar projects, that the committee will maybe agree that we write to the department, just seeking further information from the department on the governing arrangements in place for the build and lessons that have been learnt from the maternity hospital build here, but maybe other children's hospitals elsewhere. If people are happy, we write to the department, but that we also seek and invite officials before the committee, just so that we can ascertain. I mean, we've heard what the Minister has said about governance arrangements and lessons learned, but I think it would be appropriate for us as a committee doing our job properly that we maybe just at this early stage get a sense of that from the department and from officials. Diane?
Excuse me. Yes, thank you. I've no problem with that at all. I think it's a very wise thing, and I'm pretty sure. I don't know how we achieve it, but I think it's the right thing to do, and that we keep a close eye on this particular issue. Can I? Included in notes is another investment strategy report, which still indicates, despite the Minister's letter to the committee members, that the build will be over £1 billion. Could we ask for further clarity on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll come to that specific issue when we're doing correspondence, Dan. But I mean, I do think when we get the officials here, we can ask them or alert them to some of the issues that we will be raising and hope that they're coming with answers. So,
right, and no, that's fine. I mean, I can raise it here, or I'll raise it in correspondence again. But just when you mentioned the Children's Hospital, I thought it is appropriate for us to ask why are those people responsible for the Northern Ireland Investment Strategy still quoting over £1 billion, while the Minister tells us it's 671 million.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. We do have a response from the Minister
Yeah, I
at
know. I read
9.8.
it.
So we do of the correspondence, and I'll just read it out. SIB has provided the following explanation. The over 1 billion listed is incorrect due to an input error where the system required values to be entered in thousands, e.g. 1 million should be entered as 1,000. The value for the children's main build construction was inputted at 373,192,518, which was then incorrectly read as 373 billion. So it was an error in the input on the system, caused it to read that the cost was 373 billion, not 373 million.
Chair, with your permission, I must say it's all gobbledygook, isn't it? I mean, how are we to have any confidence in the figures that the Health Service give to SIB to make up the ISNI report, or any confidence in the ISNI report, when they don't know the difference between billions and millions, and they still continue to make the mistake? If it is a mistake, it is farcical. I'll leave it there.
No, and I don't think anybody's going to disagree that when this committee or any committee is getting figures that they're accurate and they should be accurate.
Absolutely.
So, absolutely. So I do. If everybody's in agreement, we'll write to the department. We'll ask for officials to come before us and brief us on governance arrangements, checks and balances. But we will also alert them to the fact that we will raise that issue as well with them. Colin?
Just on the same, and I mean, look, we got a budget there a couple of weeks ago that included the pages that had errors that had to be corrected as well, where there was extra zeros on it. So I think maybe some civil servants are a bit sort of trigger happy with the 0 button on the keypad, so we'll just keep an eye on that. But I did a radio interview on the issue of the new build, and there was reference made to me that I know about the governance, the extra governance arrangements that were going to be put in place. And the interviewer suggested that it was going to impact the committee. I have a funny feeling it might have been just the Minister was saying. Could we maybe write and just say, given the experiences that there's been in the past, and we understand that there are different governance checks being put in place, and could we get a copy of them to find out what they are? Because they might be useful to us as a committee to know what those extra governance issues are, that we could keep an eye out for them.
Oh, absolutely, and that's essentially what my proposal was, because it is the Minister's job to oversee this project, but it's our job to scrutinise the Minister. So it's vitally important that if the Minister's saying there are these are the new governance arrangements, this is what I have learned, then we need to be sure that we are aware of those so that we can hold him to doing his job properly moving forward. So no, I think that's all very sensible. Okay, content? So draft minutes then, members, just refer you to page 6, yes, so that's the draft minutes of our meeting held on 13th of February. Everybody content? Thank you. Can I refer members to page 2 of the table papers, and that's a note of last week's concurrent meeting with the Education Committee in Middletown Parish Church Hall. Are members content to note the informal minute of the meeting and publish it on our webpage? Thank you. Matters arising? None. Okay, so item number 5 then, which is Department of Health and Public Health Agency oral briefing on the Public Health Bill. So can I just refer members to papers which are at tab 5 of our pack, and this includes a briefing paper by the Department on the Public Health Bill, page 19, and the Department's consultation paper on the bill, which is at page 25. So can I welcome Chris Matthews, who's Director of Emergency Resilience and Protecting Health Directorate within the Department of Health, Anne McNally, Public Health Bill Team Lead within the Department of Health, and Dr. Gillian Johnson, Public Health Consultant within the Public Health Agency. So you are all very welcome. Can I remind members and witnesses that we have an hour for this session, so we'll all try to be succinct in our questions and our answers. And also the session will be covered by Hansard. So can I just invite you to present to us, and then we'll take questions later on.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to provide the Health Committee with an update on the draft Public Health Bill. The written briefing paper that was submitted last week provides an overview of the purpose of the draft Public Health Bill, a high-level summary of the responses received to the recent public consultation in advance of the publication of the full consultation analysis report, which we anticipate doing around Easter time. The briefing also set out the planned next steps in the development of a bill. In relation to the consultation, it ran for a period of 14 weeks between July and October 2024. The proposals set out in the consultation document were designed to provide a broad spectrum of proposals for consideration and invited views on specific proposals for legislative change. The consultation was widely publicised and shared with over 500 individuals and organisations. As the briefing advised, the Department has received over 8,200 responses to the consultation. Over 2,000 of those were by email and post, as opposed to through the online process. The majority of the responses were received from individuals, with around 50 received from a wide range of organisations, including councils, trade unions, health and social care bodies, education providers, the political parties, religious, community and voluntary groups, representatives of the judiciary, and several organisations within equality, data protection and human rights remit. The Department welcomes the considerable interest shown by all who responded to the public consultation, and the views expressed will shape how we collectively respond in an effective, appropriate and proportionate way to the 21st century public health incidents and emergencies. Crucially, any update to the current Act will incorporate human rights protections introduced since the Act came into effect in 1967. In terms of the health protection powers, a core focus of the proposals is being able to respond to a broader range of contemporary or novel public health security issues and threats. It's important to state that there is no intention to deviate from the current day-to-day proportionate response approach to public health incidents and emergencies, which in almost every single situation sees those involved voluntarily cooperate in the response to protect themselves, those close to them and the wider population. Whilst cooperation and the proportionate effective response are the standard, a range of safeguards and protections will be introduced on how we respond to health incidents and emergencies, including strict conditions and limitations. Judicial approval, review periods, a right of appeal and compensation are protection measures that will be introduced. Why the particular measures are necessary will also be clearly explained. Moving beyond the standard would only be considered in exceptional circumstances where there is no other alternative, is supported by medical evidence and with the appropriate safeguards and protections. If a wider societal response is required, if it's the only option, it would be subject to the agreement of the Executive and Assembly. In terms of the consultation, due to the volume of responses received to the consultation, the detailed response analysis is still ongoing. However, we have identified themes emerging in the responses. I'm pleased that the majority of the organisations endorsed the need to update existing public health legislation and provided helpful insights and advice from their areas of expertise. The points raised by specialist bodies will be particularly helpful in further developing the proposals. To make some reference to the human rights protections, the impact of the proposed health protection measures on personal rights and freedoms emerged as the most common area of concern amongst consultation respondents. A core purpose of the modernisation of the 1967 Act is to incorporate human rights protections into public health legislation and to place safeguards and protections around any action that the Public Health Agency may seek to take. It's important to point out that many of the health protection powers that have been set out are already available under the current public health legislation. Concerns were expressed in relation to proposed powers to enter dwellings, to ask questions and gather information, to impose medical examinations and vaccinations, and to isolate and quarantine individuals. Many organisations also stressed the importance of ensuring compliance with the human rights legislation. In early September, officials became aware of misinformation circulating to the public around aspects of the consultation. In response to this, the Department published a fact file which sought to clarify the policy intent. The Department fully recognises that the issues discussed in the consultation document may have called up difficult memories of COVID-19 pandemic experiences and of the measures that were required to address it. The Minister has been very clear of the need to strike the right balance between safeguarding personal liberty and the Department's responsibility to protect the wider community. For that reason, we have been and will continue to work closely with the Human Rights Commission to ensure that proposed measures align with human rights. A full human rights impact assessment will also be undertaken, which will incorporate equality considerations. A full data protection impact assessment will also be undertaken. Preparedness and resilience. I just wanted to mention that the Department is also leading on a broader programme of work to ensure a proportionate, appropriate and effective response to 21st century public health incidents and emergencies. This includes developing our surveillance to better identify threats earlier and take timely action. We're also building resilience across health and social care system and working with the Executive Office to develop cross-government resilience to better enable us to respond effectively and proportionately to public health incidents and emergencies. Finally on our plan next steps. In terms of next steps, officials are working to finalise the consultation summary report, which will be shared with the committee and published on the Department's website. This report will assist with the refinement of the policy proposals over the coming months. Since the consultation closed in October, the feedback received has helped to guide further targeted stakeholder engagement, such as with the Human Rights Commission, Information Commissioner, and further engagement will take place with a range of other stakeholders, including the Public Health Agency, environmental health colleagues, and emergency services around roles and responsibilities. The timeline for the introduction of the Public Health Bill was subject to the necessary approvals and Assembly timetabling. Officials will continue to liaise with the Office of the Legislative Council in relation to timescales. Thank you for the opportunity to brief you today on the progress of the bill, and we would be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that clarification about the engagement with the Human Rights Commission is important, and the Minister's commitment that there will be a full human rights impact assessment. I think that's a vital point to make. You finished there just talking about time frame and engagement. We obviously have the Minister before us to talk about his legislative programme and budget, and he never mentioned the bill in that. So it would be useful if the committee today had any knowledge of time frame. Is it going to come in this mandate? When is it likely to come in this mandate? And what preparations are being carried out to make that happen?
From my perspective, there's been no decision taken at this stage if it will be within I expect it to be within the current mandate, but that needs to be considered along the time frame for the other bills that the Department's considering. So I'm involved in that conversation, but there's been no decision made. But we are continuing to complete the consultation review. We're already engaged with OLC and we're continuing to progress the bill as it stands, whilst obviously those decisions are taken at a departmental level and by the Minister as to which bills will be brought forward in this current mandate.
Okay, and in terms of engagement with other executive departments and other statutory, you talked about the important engagement with the Human Rights Commission. So it would be useful to know what engagement's taking place with the other government departments, indeed what engagement's taking place with the PSNI, who obviously would have a role or potentially have a role or responsibility in enforcing this legislation.
There was some initial meetings with the PSNI and other government departments. Coming out of the consultation exercise, once it's completed, then there will be a further engagement and communication strategy at that point in time. We haven't, at this point, further engaged with the PSNI because we're still finalising the proposals within the bill. The bill will set the framework. What will then happen is that the legislation will be considered under regulations as to what is brought forward for consideration by the committee and by the Assembly in terms of any powers that we give to the PHA to be able to take necessary actions. So that will happen, but it hasn't happened at this point.
Okay, so and the bill will set the framework and then there'll be regulations brought forward. Will those regulations all be brought forward from within the Department of Health, or is there a likelihood that some of them could be brought forward by other departments?
At this stage, there's no plan for any to be brought forward by other departments. It may be the case that in an emergency situation, as was the case under COVID, the department made regulations for other departments. The thinking going forward would be that as they became considerably more intricate in terms of their need, and it was to do with people working in the what sector was it?
Hospitality.
It was, thank you, sorry. It was the hospitality sector. It became more intricate. Then the consideration would be that those areas may be best placed to bring forward those pieces of legislation for consideration. But again, that would be much further down the line.
Thank you. Colin, you're next, but I'm not sure whether you're giving evidence or taking evidence.
Oh, believe me, taking. Look, I do not mean this in an offensive way, but it will sound offending, so I'm putting that health warning at the start of it. This just felt to me the way not to go about doing a consultation. We were inundated with people that just read pieces of the information that was in it. I think the information was presented in a way that if you were a technical individual and understood it, you probably got the run of it. If you were a conspiracy theorist out there, it gave you enough to be able to go on a big long run, and we got many of those rants. It's probably one of the top issues that I had received correspondence about. And the frustrating thing was much of what was being said wasn't borne out if you actually read into it. So I think if we can really, I think it would have been fair point to say, this is going to be pretty controversial. We need to be really careful about how we present it. But I think it just followed the procedure that's always there. It went out and it just caused an absolute massive revulsion coming back the way. And I'm sure other members were the same, getting dozens and dozens and dozens of emails at a time. They set up those online petitions and the emails were just pinging in on a regular basis. But it does lay bare something which I think is interesting in terms of legislation. How many of the public consultation feedback that you got were against were negative and unhappy with the actual legislation? And how much of that then is taken on board? I mean, if you have 8,200 responses, if 8,000 of them were negative, does this mean that you just go back to a drawing board, that you highlight the bits that people said were negative and then actually try to change it? Or is it a case of you've got your things that you've presented, that's the way that it's going to be? And are we able to track the changes between the document that was presented and then any changes that will be made after? Or can you tell us of any major themes that you're saying the public were absolutely outraged by this, we need to go back to the drawing board?
A lot of it was to do with the human rights implications, and I think, to be fair, there was a lot of misunderstanding and reading into it that what we were going to do was actually going to have a negative impact on people's human rights, whereas in fact it's actually the other way. It's introducing, because the 67 Act doesn't cover human rights, whereas this will, and that's partly why we've been working very closely with the Human Rights Commission, and that's partly why we need to try and ensure that the narrative going forward explains all of that, explains the various balances, controls and checks that will be in place to ensure that we don't give the impression that the department is just going to impose things on people. Like if we bring forward, if we produce a bill and we bring forward regulations, those regulations will be subject to scrutiny before they are introduced. So all of that will happen, all the checks and balances in terms of having the right to appeal, having the right to challenge a court order if that needs to be the case, will be there. But a lot of what we are bringing forward, yes, it's enhancing what is already there, but a lot of those powers already exist. And the Public Health Agency has, as I had mentioned in my sort of opening remarks, the vast majority of situations have not required them to actually put any of those into place. The purpose of this is to bring it up to date for 21st century risks. So you're not just talking about infectious disease and high infectious disease, you're talking about contamination, you're talking about other risks to human life that may be required. Most people respond and do what they're asked to do because they see the benefit for them, their family and the wider public. So we've had issues to do with Mpox, we've had issues to do with H5N1. Those have all been dealt with on a day-to-day basis by the Public Health Agency and the staff within health and social care. So it hasn't required that. I think the issue is we need to make sure that people are clear and understanding that this is trying to build in those protections, but we're also doing an awful lot of work around better preparing ourselves. So not only in terms of day-to-day responding to emergencies, and like an emergency that happens today and how we respond and how we work with other departments and we work with colleagues in the south, but also then in relation to planning for another pandemic. One of my areas of responsibility is pandemic resilience. So we are working with the HSC to develop our pandemic resilience. So we're looking stockpiling's part of that, better planning and responsiveness within the HSC. We're working with TEO on the cross-government response, so what education will do, what everybody, and how we will respond to try and ensure that we have resilience. That means that if we face a pandemic in the future, hopefully we won't have to go into the stages that we did with COVID, and hopefully we can maintain our services. I have stockpiling, which is looking at vaccinations, it's looking at PPE, face masks, all of that fits within my area. So the bill and the responsibilities, or what we're trying to do in the bill, is only one aspect of the overall learning that we're taking from COVID and the experiences that we've had thus far. So yes, there are issues raised, and the vaccination one came up very clearly, and the Minister went out and said that is not going to be part of this, but we put everything out there to say these are the things that we would consider. A number of those, and if you've obviously, as you will have done, read through the consultation document, if you look at some of the information around Part 141 to 144, where it talks about interventions for people and for premises and for things, all of those won't be in the bill. Those will be brought forward consideration and detailed consideration under regulations. So all of that will be open to that detailed scrutiny. And we need to try and make clear to people what checks and balances will be in there. And most people do the right thing, but we do need to be able to respond if we find ourselves in a situation where somebody has been infected and is not prepared to do what they need to do for their benefit and for others.
There's some really good key parts in that response, which I think we need to pull out to be able to go back to people if they come. I was quite surprised at our presentation today that the email box didn't start to ping up again on people coming to that. But there is good, clear information in that answer to show that. But there's no substantial human rights change from what was there previously to what's there proposed at this stage. Would you say would that be a fair comment?
The 1967 doesn't include human rights. The new one will. So I'm not saying that you would, but there are things potentially in the current legislation where the PHA could impose something on somebody and there is no right of appeal. But under the changes that we're proposing with the human rights, there will be the right of appeal, the right to apply to the court, and the PHA will have to go to court to get a court order to be able to do certain actions. They can, for instance, if they need access to premises, they can request that people give them access to premises. And if that person then agrees, that's fine. If they say no, they can then take this next stage of action, which is say, okay, if you don't give us this, we're going to then go to the court and ask the court to give us. But the court is going to say, you need to clearly explain why you need this, how long it's for, when it's going to be reviewed, and when it's going to then be stopped. And that person will have a right of appeal against that too.
Perfect. That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. 8,200 responses is a phenomenal response to a consultation, and to a very long, complicated and convoluted consultation, as it needs to be. It's fair, that's fair enough. But it is an amazing response. And I suppose that's partly driven by the fact that COVID is still in everyone's memory. And there are many families and children and so on who still suffer from the impact of COVID regulations. So I'm not surprised that it was driven in that way. A couple of things really that interest me around this. One, this bill or these proposals see enormous power being given to the Public Health Agency. And for an arm's length body of government, it is a substantial amount of transfer to them under the proposals that we read. And yet the COVID inquiry tells us that the Public Health Agency didn't always have the stats to back up some of the measures that we're being asked to implement. Are you confident that the Public Health Agency will be able to do everything that these proposals request of them?
Well, Yeah, the short answer is yes, because many of the proposals they already have the powers to do, and it's to do with the day-to-day response to emergencies and issues that emerge, such as Mpox, H5N1, all of those sorts of day-to-day highly infectious diseases. There's also, part of the bill is also about improving surveillance so that they know earlier and more fully what is actually happening in relation to infectious diseases. And the work that we're doing on the pandemic resilience with the PHA, the SPPG, and working with colleagues in UK and in the Republic around data sharing, working together to plan better, to respond to it. All of that will put them in a better position to be able to respond to a future pandemic, if that's where we find ourselves. Part of the pandemic resilience planning is looking at our capacity for testing, looking at vaccinations, looking at PPE. So it's looking to have a lot of the measures in place that we didn't have at the start of the last pandemic, which means that we should be in a better position to be able to respond more quickly and try and address the issues that we face more quickly. And the experience, obviously, that the PHA has had in relation to that, particularly around contact tracing and those sorts of things, should enable them to be in a much better position to respond going forward.
Well, maybe it would be useful, Chris, if then the committee just received a briefing, tell us what has changed at the PHA, that they are now able, are going to be able to do all of those things, which the COVID inquiry has kind of demonstrated that were a problem. And, and certainly at the start, and I accept that, it was the unknown that was terribly difficult to deal with. But it just would be important that if the new proposals invest this type of power in an arm's length body of government, that we are sufficiently sure that they're able to do it. And I just ask finally as well, one of the things that really was lacking during COVID was the fact that regs were brought to the Assembly weeks after they were implemented. In what circumstances would we be able to see forward planning to make sure that this sort of thing doesn't happen again?
Well, I suppose that's the proposal in the bringing forward the bill, that we would hopefully not find ourselves in the situation before where they come at such a late time and without obviously proper scrutiny. But part of that is around the planning. It's around the work we're doing on the PPE, the resilience and all of that. So if we're in a position where we can respond more quickly at the beginning of the situation, that gives us time to then look to see what actions need to be taken across Northern Ireland, not just within health, but within education and other areas, as to how we then need to respond. And the Bingham report also recommends that what we would do is the Minister, based on medical advice, would bring forward a proposal to say that we are going into an emergency situation to the Assembly for discussion and debate, to then have a decision that based on the evidence we are, and that then moves us into the position of potentially bringing forward regulations for consideration in short time frames. They're even looking, currently I think it's sitting at 14 days, and there's some discussion going on about potentially bringing that to 7 days. But that obviously then needs to be considered by this committee and by the Assembly in terms of Northern Ireland's response to making those regulations in those sorts of time frames too.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Danny?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. Like Colin and I'm sure all other MLAs right across the Assembly, I got a lot of communication about this. Some of it quite hysterical, it has to be said. There were things, Nazi Germany was brought up, and I'm sure things the department had no intention of ever bringing in were thrown around as if they were facts. I think you referenced it there when you were saying about misinformation. It appeared, now, the consultation was never about vaccinations, but it appeared to be hijacked by vaccinations, and particularly by not everybody who was concerned about it, but a lot of people who were concerned about it, from my perspective, seemed to be quite anti-vaccinations. So I think that refers to the misinformation, but I'll ask you just about that later. I appreciate the fact file that was put out. I think possibly that was a bit on the late side, given the hysterical generation that came up. Possibly if that could have accompanied it initially, that would have been able to allay some people's fears initially. The media generation then that sort of built up from that was quite ahead of steam, and actually had the minister coming out during the consultation period and distancing himself from aspects of the consultation, which I thought was very, very surprising to see. You know, it wouldn't be something you would normally expect. My first question is just about that misinformation that you'd cited there. What specifically was the nature of the misinformation you referred to?
I think the misinformation was around, in the main, around the impact on human rights and, accessing people's houses without consent and putting them into hospital without their consent. That a lot of it was about really just that infringement on them and their family and imposing things on them, which one of the three fundamentals of the bill was to ensure that it was human right compliant, based on the fact that the 67 wasn't. So that just went off, and as that just snowballed from there. And we did, there was a number of press releases and obviously the fact file and that, and the minister did come out and he did say, I have put all this out there for people to consider, but obviously based on, it wouldn't be my intention to bring forward the one around the mandatory vaccinations. So he did try to provide some clarity around that, but also say all of it's out there for people to consider. But the human rights and running off with, coming into my home without my consent, we're all got carried away with that. But that isn't, again, that is not the intention whatsoever in terms of accessing, somebody's dwelling. If you need to access that, you need to go and provide a magistrate with detailed information as to why you would actually need to do that. And the person will have a right of appeal against that. So all of that misinformation then led to people thinking that we were trying to do things that were draconian, when in fact we were actually trying to go the other direction.
Will those responses that reference those what were referred to as draconian measures, will they be weighed, given that there was an element of misinformation in them?
Well, in considering those, yes, but we need to consider them in the context of the misinformation. So a key part of today for me and the others was to make sure that there was a clear understanding that this is about improving people's human rights. It's about giving people those protections. It's about making sure those balances are all there. It's not about giving the PHA carte blanche. In fact, in some ways, it's about restricting what the PHA can do because they need to go to court, etc. But back to a point I'd made earlier, they haven't needed to do that day to day in the work that they do, which much of these proposals already cover. People want to do the right thing because they're protecting themselves, their family, their neighbours, etc. But yes, those checks and balances will all be in that as well.
Just on that, could you tell us how this bill will improve human rights, particularly in relation to the European Convention on Human Rights or treaties like the UNCRC and the UNCRPD?
Well, in terms of doing the full human rights impact assessment, that will look at all the equality issues as well. There'll be a data protection one done as well. So it will, and it also, we're a signatory to the Convention for Health. So we are signatory to that as part of the UK, and one of the issues in it is to ensure that we have a broad response to health risks. So we are currently not achieving that because our Act is in 1967. By doing what we're doing, we'll ensure that we're actually meeting our requirements under that as well.
So it's actually stronger on human rights, in the grounds of human rights, than certainly
absolutely.
The 1967 Act is quite outdated.
Yes.
And this puts in a lot more of the more recent human rights conventions into place.
Yeah, and a lot of protections as well.
No problem. And I really appreciate that. Obviously, lessons have to be learned from COVID. As Diane mentioned, there was a time when nothing was really known about it, and a lot of regulations were put in place very quickly. So this will give us knowledge and make us better prepared for the next time.
Yes, this along with the work that we're doing around our emergency planning, our pandemic resilience, the work in the Department of Health, the work across the wider government, the work that we're doing with the UK. We have an exercise Pegasus in the autumn that UK are leading on. Northern Ireland's a core part of that. Our colleagues in the South are running an exercise in early March that people from my team, from the Public Health Agency, are going to observe on. We're working with our colleagues in the South around their pandemic planning, our pandemic planning, to ensure that, because obviously a pandemic doesn't recognise the border, so there's a lot we need to do there in terms of proving data sharing, the relationships and all of that as well.
Thank you. I really appreciate this, and thank you very much.
Nola?
Thank you very much for the presentation, and hopefully, coming moving forward as we progress the bill, we can ensure that the facts are front and centre to what it will actually contain, and the committee will also, during the process of scrutinising the bill, hear from the likes of the Human Rights Commission for that human rights based evidence too. I wanted to ask, you mentioned around the regulation making powers, particularly the regulations around the Bingham report, and then the difference between the immediate emergency situation. So the regulations that will be made in the Assembly, the affirmative procedure, because not people aren't aware of what that means, we are as MLAs. So can you confirm, does that mean that they will only go ahead once approved and spoken to in the Assembly?
And that is always the intention, but as I had said to the committee the previous time I was here, with all the planning I've explained in terms of ensuring we're in the best place possible to respond in the future, that would certainly be the intention. But the regulations would potentially provide for the ability to bring something forward in an emergency situation that would then retrospectively need to be debated within 7 to 14 days, and it would have be in for a limited period of time, and if it wasn't debated within 14 days it would fall. So those are some of the things that we're considering as an emergency, but all of the work we're doing is to try and make sure that we don't find ourselves in that position, and taking into account obviously the Bingham recommendations and all of the explanation I've given around our pandemic resilience planning.
Okay, I think it's just important to highlight that issue again, and I also wanted to ask, and maybe I'm oversimplifying with regards to power that organisations such as the Public Health Agency already have, and what will this bill look like at the end compared to what they have now?
It will put in additional protections and safeguards. Not that the Public Health Agency would do something that was inappropriate, but for the individual, it will give them additional protections and safeguards, because from a number of angles, if regulations are approved for certain actions after a bill, that will go through scrutiny. If they're then put in place, they will include protections for the individual, in that the Public Health Agency would have to get a magistrate's order for a certain action to be taken. The individual would also then have the right of appeal against that, and even if it is brought in, it would be time limited. And it would have to be reviewed on a regular basis. So there are a number of ways in which it would protect people going forward based on human rights, to give them a better protection than potentially could be the case now.
Thank you. I just think it's important to highlight that again. Also wanted to ask, in the briefing, it's outlined about aligning with UK jurisdictions. You've also highlighted about the Republic of Ireland, because any pandemic or epidemic doesn't see a border. But also here it says to comply with the World Health Organization international health regulations. I wonder if you could say a bit more about that with regards to any coordination that you're having. Everything's up to date. There's not going to be additional inclusions that weren't in, because I understand that the WHO also, or the World Health Organization, also updates as time moves on. So has there been any changes that we need to?
There's been no significant changes at this
Okay.
stage in relation to that, and that's the what I was referring to Danny earlier, and I couldn't remember when I was actually answering your question what it was, and that's that piece of legislation. But it has a requirement on us to be able to respond to all hazards, and that's what we weren't doing, and that's what this bill will now do. It will enable us to do that.
And if there are any additional changes, on that global scale,
Yeah.
will this legislation enable those changes to be included through regulation? if it includes all hazards, it includes all hazards. But if the World Health Organization international health regulations changes and it updates, will that require additional legislation, or will this piece of legislation actually enable it through regulations?
The answer is I don't know until we see what it is that they bring forward, but there is potential that it would require us to bring forward regulations if something was to significantly change. At this stage I just don't know. But
I just think it's another thing to note,
course.
that because we align with other jurisdictions, because we align or we're signatory to the World Health Organization, that actually just because there's changes there doesn't mean it's brought in here without scrutiny. So I think it's important.
And if it would be scrutinised.
Yeah, well, thank you very much.
Alan?
Thanks, Chair. Chris, given the figure there of 8,200 responses, how does that fare in compared to other departmental consultations? I assume that that is a significant response rate.
Yeah, it would be. Yeah, it probably. It's been a while since I've brought a bill forward, but from knowledge of others, yeah, it would be quite a significantly higher response rate to any other bill.
Just another question then. Obviously, the Minister in his intervention accepted that there was public confidence was undermined. How going forward will you ensure that you get the public back on board again? And I say this with the greatest respect to the three, as three professional individuals. It won't be yourselves as faceless Chris or Dr. Gillian or Anne who will be on the firing line as this bill is moulded and shaped. It'll be us within this chamber. So how will you ensure that there is public confidence again, once again?
And that will be through the engagement with representatives, yourselves, others, and the general messaging that we will need to put out around what the bill is actually about, and the opportunities that we have, such as today and coming back to the committee in future, to try and provide that clarity and understanding to the committee and to our key stakeholders about what the bill is actually about. It also is others then, the work that we're doing with the Human Rights Commission, with the Information Commissioner, and it's their focus on it and their understanding of it and their articulation of what the bill is actually about from their angle, I think will be a number of the key aspects to try and get the public to understand what this is actually about.
Happy enough. That's everybody. Thank you very much. Chris and Dr. Gillian, thank you very much for coming before us.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you. So, members, we're now moving to item number 6 on the agenda, which is a oral briefing on autism strategy from Department of Health officials. So, can I just remind members that an embargoed copy of the autism strategy 23-28 monitoring report was emailed to members in the committee yesterday. A copy of the report is included in table papers at page 8. Refer members to papers at tab 6, and this includes a briefing paper from the Minister on the autism strategy. That's at page 107, and our officials are just coming in, so we'll just wait. Okay.
No.
That was quite a professional.
Okay, so we have Mark McGuckian, Director of Disability and Older People within the Department of Health, Nigel Chambers, Head of Learning Disability and Autism, Department of Health, Maurice Leeson, Programme Manager, Partnerships, Emotional Health and Wellbeing, Department of Health, and Paul Miller, Commissioning Lead, Emotional Health and CAMS, Department of Health. So Nigel and Maurice, you are here on a weekly basis now, it seems. I want to welcome you all. Just before we start, I just think it's important, as Chair of the Committee, I put on record that we have long since organised this briefing on the issue of autism, and we get the report the day before, not really allowing members much time to scrutinise it in advance of this committee, because I know for myself I had meetings right up until 9 o'clock last night, so I'm meeting today, so that's unfortunate that we didn't get a bit more time. That said, we appreciate you coming before us to present to us, so I'm going to hand over to you before then members get to ask questions.
I'll kick off with opening remarks. And yes, back again after a day trip down in Middletown. So Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for the opportunity for officials to provide a committee with an update then on the implementation of the Autism Strategy 23 to 28. And it's also an opportunity then to provide you an overview of the work that's underway across government to deliver better outcomes for autistic people. Now, as set out in your written briefing, Northern Ireland is quite unique in terms of legislation for autistic people. Both the 2011 and 2022 legislation placed duties on health in terms of autism prevalence, the development and implementation of a strategy, and monitoring as well. In addition then, there's also a requirement to appoint an autism reviewer, and the functions of that role are set out quite clearly in the legislation. And it's accurate to say then that the legislation is prescriptive in setting out the approach, the methodology that must be taken to develop and deliver the strategy. And the Department is committed to the full implementation of both Autism Acts. And today's briefing will hopefully outline and provide you the assurance that work is underway to fully meet these statutory duties. So to start with, a bit of a context piece, I'd like to just set out just some of the overview of the challenges really across health and social care in terms of autism, the work underway to address these challenges, and to provide you an overview of direction of travel. So, as you're aware, autism is not an illness that can be treated. It is a lifelong neurodivergence that, with better education and understanding for us all, can help people lead fuller and healthier lives and provide the same benefits and freedoms that a lot of us already do. However, we must also recognise that for some individuals, their autism can be disabling at points in their lives, and at times that may require specialist services, specialist support, and that has to go beyond better education and understanding. And whilst not a mental health issue, it is common for people with autism or autistic people to experience mental health issues such as anxiety and depression. And it is recognised by the Department of Health that the mental health needs of this population could be better served by our existing mental health service. But at this stage, it's also important to reiterate that the evidential, professional and policy position remains that these needs are best met by a mainstream mental health service that is reasonably adjusted and autism aware. Work is already underway to improve equity of access and outcomes for this population, including the launch of new training that has been developed in collaboration with the Middletown Centre for Autism, and that's due to launch in spring of this year. We also must be cognizant that 3 in 10 people with learning disabilities will also have a coexisting diagnosis of autism, and that population can present with exceptional levels of need in terms of health and social care. And while significant progress has been made to co-design an adult learning disability service model to better meet needs and to ensure regional consistency of service provision, it is fair to say that that work has slowed since I last briefed you in May of last year. However, I remain hopeful that we will be making our way to a public consultation in the coming months. In terms of autistic children, including those with learning disabilities, members will be aware that significant progress has been made to develop and implement a framework for children with disabilities. And this work has been rapidly accelerated by the Minister's recent decision to allocate an additional £13 million recurrently to children's disability services. And as you'd mentioned, Chair, Maurice and I will be seeing you again in a few weeks to provide you with a verbal briefing on the progress that's been made since October. Lastly, so many people for so many years have been allowed to go undiagnosed, and that's not good enough. Now, while diagnosis is not the solution for all problems faced, and not necessary to open every door, it is the start of a journey for each person diagnosed. And the Department is aware of significant waiting lists in terms of autism diagnosis, ranging from 3 to 7 years for children and adults respectively. There is significant variation in terms of our diagnostic rates, up to nearly a factor of 4 across trusts, and there are up to 13 different pathways for assessment. It is the Department and Minister's view that this is not acceptable, and officials are identifying best practice to ensure that it is common practice. Work is now underway to produce a regionally standardised pathway for assessment of autism, and that will better allow us to manage and reduce our waiting lists. In terms of the autism strategy, the Department has taken a leading role in producing and developing a cross-departmental strategy to address the long-standing inequalities for this population. And despite a very challenging financial and political context, the Department continued with the development of a new strategy which was published in late 2023, aligned to the legislative requirements set out by the 2011 and 2022 Acts. The strategy recognises that the challenges faced by autistic people are cross-cutting and therefore require collaboration across government sectors and, most importantly, autistic people. This strategy is supported through increased collaboration across sectors, and the 2-year delivery plan outlines actions across health, education, communities, economy, and a range of our statutory and independent sector delivery partners. It sets out the outcomes we seek to achieve and the timeframes for delivery. And in advance of your questions today, I do concede that the strategy could be stronger on measurable targets as set out in the legislation, and work is already underway to address this deficit. The strategy and underpinning delivery plan are not only informed through consultation and engagement, but through evidence and best practice. This was not a one-off engagement, and we continue to engage autistic people and the sector via the Department's Autism Forum, which was established in 2021, which is co-chaired by an autistic advocate and I, to consider issues on a thematic basis and to inform the delivery of the LIFE strategy. A consistent message from the people that we support and their families that they want actions and not words. And this was a common theme that was highlighted through the consultation that resulted in the 2023 strategy. Today we are in a position to provide an overview of several actions that have been progressed within the first year of strategy development, and a more detailed report was sent to the Assembly and arrived in your inboxes yesterday. I am hopeful this written briefing, though, arrived with you in good advance of today's meeting. So I won't go into too much detail because some of the deliverables are already within your paper, but you'll see quite clearly significant progress has been made in terms of employment, and we have developed and collaborated with the Equality Commission for Northern Ireland to develop a guide for employers in terms of autism awareness and reasonable adjustments, and this was launched late last year. Capacity building sessions have been developed in collaboration with the Housing Executive, and over 600 staff have taken part. GP training videos have been developed to improve equity of access in primary care, and that is about improving awareness of autistic issues and challenges in accessing GP surgeries, but also the reasonable adjustments that can be taken in terms of assessment and treatment. A review has been completed in terms of learning disability coexisting diagnosis of autism to better understand the needs of that population. Alongside that then, the HSE Leadership Centre have also undertaken a review of the regional autism information needs of this population, and the Phase 1 report that's been produced has provided a very comprehensive and long list outside of health and within health of the information needs of this population, and work is now already underway with our departmental partners to start consolidating a lot of the information and guidance that's already out there into a single resource, whilst also addressing the gaps of information that's currently not there that families and people supported can't access. Lastly but not least, the Autism Reviewer was appointed in September of last year. I'm conscious she briefed you last week, so you're very aware of the functions that are set out in the role and the work that she's been doing and what she'll be doing going forward. In conclusion then, the Department has a robust understanding of the challenges faced by autistic people in Northern Ireland, not just within health and social care, but wider public services. This understanding, grounded in evidence and guided by those with lived experience, has very much set the way forward in delivering better outcomes across government. It was developed through a process of respect, listening and involvement, and that is very much the process that we are sticking to in terms of implementation, and that we recognise that the importance of ensuring, that all autistic people and those awaiting diagnosis, their families and carers, receive the right access to services at the right time, at the right place. And I'm hopeful that the evidence provided today within your papers and our responses to your questions provide that assurance that we are taking action and not just saying words. The work, I suppose, consolidated within the monitoring report has now enabled us to shift to the next phase of our work, which is beginning to develop the final 3 years of the implementation plan for the strategy. So I'll pause there. Thank you very much for your time and look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. So yes, we obviously were in Milltown Centre of Excellence for Autism last week, and it was very, I can speak personally, it was extremely informative in relation to the work that they do there and the opportunity they have for educating others in relation to the work they do. I mean, I raised it last week, I'm going to raise it again. I felt from the presentation from them that, you know, we're maybe not utilising their ability and expertise as much as we should be. I certainly think that's what they felt as well. So, I mean, that is an appeal that I will make at the beginning that, you know, we have this centre of excellence which is doing great work in terms of research and education and training, and I think they could be utilised much more. Last week was obviously focused. It was a joint meeting with ourselves and our education colleagues, and a lot of it was focused towards the impact within the educational setting. So there's one aspect where I certainly think Milltown Centre could be used much more. You also talked in your presentation about the autism reviewer being appointed. I think that's obviously very good news. I think she gave powerful testimony last week as well. She's not long in her job, so but I certainly expect her role to be very important with regard to moving forward with the strategy. So in terms of questions, in the briefing paper you talked about, and you mentioned there, equity of access. You talked about the waiting lists, and you've talked about the disparity across trusts. So you said that you're moving towards a regional strategy. Can I ask what actions are going to be contained within that strategy to ensure equity of access and consistent pathways right across the north, given that assessments are taking so long currently?
Yeah, if I could, sorry, just to say that last week when we were discussing in Middletown, we did mention the fact we did have some training that's been commissioned with, for health service staff, which we're very much looking forward to being able to launch in the near future. In terms of equity of access, what we've done so far within children's services, I should say, is that we have looked at all the different pathways that currently exist across Northern Ireland for children and families to be referred. And we're currently putting together a group where we're looking to see if what is the best, what can we learn from the different pathways, and how can we produce one pathway which is, the best that we can do, so that we can cut down on duplication and as I say, for families, produce a simpler system. We've also put together a framework for emotional health and well-being, which will set the context in which we will do our reform work of autism services going forward, and we're going out to consultation on that in April.
In terms of the adult services piece, then it's within a separate programme of care and cuts across a number of services. As a happy coincidence, it's very rare that we can be in the position to say this, a new post has actually commenced today within SPPG in terms of adult commissioning for autism services, and certainly that's very much responding to the review of adult services for people with autism. Very much recognising that, yes, there is the overall narrative that we need to make mainstream services accessible. But at times, as mentioned in the opening remarks, we need to recognise that maybe the need for specialists at point in the service. Certainly, in terms of the waiting lists are longer in terms of adults, so up to 3 years for children, but up to 7 years for adults. And while diagnosis should not be necessary to access services, that is the reality for children and adults. So one of the first pieces of work that new role is going to have to undertake is looking at the adult diagnosis piece, because there's big pieces of work happening in children's services that cut across emotional health and well-being, our children's disability framework and beyond. I was conscious actually the significant interface with special educational need, but that isn't necessarily in place in terms of our adult service.
And I mean, you'll not be surprised that when you say waiting lists are 3 years for children and 7 years for that's. I'm trying to find a word that I can use to adequately describe it, but it's probably unacceptable, but certainly a really stark figure. So, obviously there's a strategy, we hopefully will see movement in that. Can I ask, in terms of that delay, what services are in place to support families whilst they wait for a diagnosis?
It is our intention to move to a system which is much more about supporting people now. And we are very conscious of the fact that when people are on a waiting list, they have real issues, real problems in their lives, and we need to address those immediately. So we want to move much more towards a system that says, if you're in a queue, that we can support you straight away with whatever the presenting issues are for you, as opposed to, as I say, someone on a waiting list and having no support in the interim period.
In addition to that as well, Chair, we have to accept that part of the pressures we have on waiting lists is because we have a system that is so dependent on diagnosis or statementing at times to access support. Previously I've said we need to change that mindset, but it's more than a mindset, it's a reality for families. When families approach health and social care at the early stage, it could be for, I wouldn't say a simple need, but things like toileting, bedtimes, meal times, school runs. You don't get those right at the start, and you don't provide support, and you hinge that, you tie it to an autism diagnosis, those needs will escalate. And certainly in terms of our children's disability framework, the first pillar of our work is about increasing the early offer of help and community-based support, and that is shifting away from a medical model to a needs-based model. You know, a lot of families, when they notice things are different for their children in the early years, part of it is actually, okay, what does the road ahead look like? You know, what are the pathways to service? How can I access things? It might even be an information need, but if we leave that unmet, are we really surprised we have such pressures on our short break service years down the road?
No, and I understand that, but I mean, we did hear testimony last week about the kind of relief that a diagnosis provided to families when they were finally given a diagnosis of just what exactly if it was autism or whatever. So I mean, I accept that we need to do that, but we also need to move quickly towards diagnosis as well, because that not only gives relief to families, but it also opens the doors to other pathways as well. Just one final question for me in terms of funding of the strategy. Is there a total value to funding the strategy in totality, and how much money has been spent doing that on a yearly basis?
We, as a department, we've allocated 300,000 in 24-25 and 300,000 25-26 towards it, Chair. But it's very difficult actually and as you'll see, and apologies that the report only issued yesterday. There was no malice of intent in that. It was delayed with me, if I'm honest with you, Chair. So the staff had done quite a bit of work on that, and it sat with me because I've been involved in the COVID inquiry and the Muckamore inquiry, so it was delayed in getting cleared for me, so apologies. The report we put out in terms of the progress report, it details where we can, what funding is put in, but it's very difficult at times to isolate a level of funding because it's wrapped in with other programmes of care. So it might be in terms of wider learning disability, or it might be in terms of some other programme of care. So there isn't a direct funding stream that says this is for autism services, but as the department, we've allocated, say, 300,000 in last year and the year before for delivery of the strategy, and the monitoring report does detail where we can, how much has been spent against each activity.
Thank you. Orlia?
Thanks very much, Chair. And thank you for the presentation and the briefing paper that we got. Nigel, I just want to come back to one of your last remarks there with the Chair around this shift in the model to a needs-based model as opposed to medical. And I totally agree, people are sort of coming up against a blockage when they do have children, young children that have additional needs, and unless they have that diagnosis, there is problems there with access and support. But how do we change that? Because that's probably like a systems-wide issue, how systems at all different levels, health, education, and how they respond to when a family or an individual is asking for help or support. And how do you envisage that we actually change that? At the moment, would the issue be that we don't have enough staff, enough training, enough resources? I'm just trying to unpick that a wee bit in terms of how you would foresee that we can shift that systems response.
And it's possibly easier for children's services than adults because of the significant work that's already underway through the Children's Services Strategic Reform Programme. I'm conscious there is a work stream in terms of early intervention and family-based support, and as I mentioned, one of the key pillars of our children's disability framework is around early intervention, community-based support. For me, the initial step around this would be understanding the actual needs of the population. So without a robust needs assessment, we would never fully understand the diversity of needs within early years, early childhood and beyond, and more importantly, the level of service that's required. That very much then shapes where we need to focus our resource in terms of understanding where the gaps are. It would also need to be accompanied by a piece of work actually mapping out a lot of the early intervention and support services available. Things like Sure Start, and I'll be looking to tomorrow on Paul in terms of some of the things that are already available, but there are a lot of good resources out there. Yep. As a father of 2 young children, I've used those resources, but equally we have to recognise that the resources currently out there families, particularly around autism, don't feel that there's enough.
Okay, thank you. And you had also mentioned, I'm not sure if I picked the detail up correctly, in terms of adult services, did you say that there's a new post being commissioned for adult services? Or
Just started today.
Brilliant, okay. No, because we've covered that previously at the committee as well, so that's being advertised then?
No, the
It's
person
recruited, the person started today.
Brilliant.
So
And that's
a happy coincidence.
I
Is
can't
that-
confirm I met the person this morning, so he's definitely real.
Oh, brilliant. And is that person working across all trusts then, or what's their sort of remit?
What we can do is we can provide you the detail in terms of the overall role, the spec of the role, so I can get that to you
Yes.
in writing because I don't have it to hand. Look, this person will be based within the within SPPG in terms of our operational side of our department,
Very good.
within our learning disability and adult safeguarding team.
Okay, no, that's definitely good news, just considering the last time the committee covered that issue, it was just so depressing because there was so little, available or in existence to help support adults with autism. So
There is a few, I suppose we are tying this in, so look, there'll be a significant piece of work that person has to undertake in terms of health and social care services. Autism is also a key component of our work around transitions. And this is a piece of work that we're working with education, economy and communities on at a departmental level, but also within HSC in terms of developing a regional protocol. But we're cognizant it's a lot of the elements of good transitions are just as applicable to autistic people as they are for learning disability. But the difference is there's not a programme of care waiting for them when they become adults. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that we need to create an autism programme of care. For lots of people, mainstream services with good adjustments are the right space, but it's still a piece that that the autism lead will need to pick up, but equally we're tying it up with our transitions work as well.
very good. Can I just ask two quick questions together, Chair? So my final questions, maybe more, this one would be directed towards you. It's specifically in terms of mental health. Nigel mentioned it in his opening remarks around, obviously it's widely recognised that a lot of people that have autism then would also suffer with mental illness or have mental health problems. So see, just in terms of the CAMHS waiting lists, I just wanted to find out, I know that some of the stats were released there, I think last week it was, but in terms of people who have autism and are sitting on a CAMHS waiting list, can you determine those figures or numbers? And I'm also conscious then that not everyone who might have a referral to CAMHS will have received their autism assessment. So a lot of people might have autism and they haven't been assessed and they're sitting on a waiting list in CAMHS. I'm just wondering, do you unpick any of that detail in terms of the waiting lists? And then my final question was just around, yes, if you can provide any sort of overview in terms of how you feel that CAMHS is actually meeting the needs of people with autism who are presenting with mental health problems, and in particularly thinking about those who would have complex mental health problems and where they would probably need more specialist interventions. If just some feedback on that would be great.
Paul's the lead commissioner for CAMHS, so if you like, he'll pick that up.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so in relation to your first question, I did ask the Trust to determine from their current waiting list and young people engaged in their services, could we identify, and in some trusts it was as high as 30% of young people currently within CAMHS, because I'm aware that there's maybe a narrative that CAMHS don't work with young people with autism, but across all trusts there are young people currently with autism are on a diagnostic waiting list in CAMHS receiving services. In terms of specialist help, we operate a step pathway depending on need. So there's step 2 would be for early primary mental health. Step 3 would be into the core specialist service where there would be consultants. And again, it really depends on the mental health diagnosis that they would get the intervention that would be linked to that need.
And that 30%, Paul, that's obviously in one trust, that figure of around 30% of the waiting lists. Would it be sort of similar across all the trusts, or is there a big variation?
Yeah, I mean, 20% up, and as I say, as high as I think a third from memory, but I can certainly come back and provide that additional information to us in terms of, and with the rollout of Encompass, that will give us a better, that data set, because obviously it's in different places, and we'll be able to pull that off. So that will certainly help highlight that. But there are certainly young people engaged in CAMS with autism on our own autism diagnosis or pathway.
Thanks very much, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the update. I'm sort of interested in the work of the Autism Reviewer, given that it was such a key part of the legislation, the Autism Amendment Bill, that a couple of us on the committee were part of that, part of the committee whenever that transited through the committee for the committee stage. I was wondering if we could just get maybe a flavour from you for the sort of resources that you've allocated to the Autism Reviewer in order to carry out their role, and whether there's any plans to increase or change that in the future.
Yeah, certainly. Initially, when Emma was appointed to the role, we put in an EO2 grade that assists just with diary management. Over the last few weeks, we've now put in a head of office, which is similar grade to you would have in the mental health champions office. It's a grade 7 in the civil service. So there's a new fella in there now working with Emma, which will start to support Emma in terms of building her business plan and looking at where her needs would be in terms of research and those sort of issues going forward. So that's only in probably the last 3 or 4 weeks, Colin, that we've put that additional resource in. We put the resource in initially just in diary management to see how the sort of role would start to develop, and we quickly realised that the reviewer would need more support at that level. We'll certainly look going forward as to whether there's more resource needed as well. We've had a number of conversations with them over recent weeks around the establishment of that head of office and then what that looks like in terms of additional support. So it's a fellow called Alan Chambers, who I think was maybe with them at the committee last week. So Alan is now in post, and Alan Chapman, not Chambers. Alan Chapman. Yeah, sorry. Alan, look, there's every doing 2 jobs. Another job for you, Alan. Sorry.
We've done away with double job.
So Alan Chapman, sorry, and he's a very experienced civil servant. So, and he's in there now, as I putting more robust arrangements around the governance and accountability frameworks and the business plan and what research needs would be. So, but Alan will then come back to us to say whether he believes he needs more support in the office as well. Alan, to be clear, Alan is a DOH civil servant, but he's working with Emma. He's still attached within my directorate, but he's working directly to Emma in terms of establishing that office.
Don't like the sound of the civil servant comes back to tell you what it is that's required. I think I would rather that Emma, as the autism reviewer, could come back. So I think maybe it might be nice to give her place. She's the reviewer and it's her office.
I maybe was misleading to you there, Colin. He will work with Emma to say what her needs are in terms of coming back to us. Alan's basically the conduit.
Emma tell you her own needs. Does it have to be this person that tells you?
It's about supporting her. It's about making sure that she has that capacity to say and to say what her business plan will look like and providing that support. Alan will not be directing. Let me be clear. Emma is still fully independent of the department at all departments. It is around having that support in place to provide. Some of it will be guidance in terms of working her way through some of the legislative issues and things like that. But Emma is still independent. She will say to Alan what she wants. He will help her develop a business plan and what those needs will be, and then he's the conduit backwards and forwards to us in the department. It separates then. Initially, a lot of that work was being done by Nigel's team within the department. Nigel's team are also responsible for the policy, so we've decided to put that bit of separation between the policy development and then the support for her going forward.
And is that staff and resource, or is there now just staff and no resource? Is there a resource to be able to do any work, or is it just...
Certainly, part of Alan's role will be helping the reviewer to establish her business plan, and then she will come to us to say, here's what I need to deliver that business plan. Now, I've already mentioned in terms of response to the chair that we put 300,000 in each year. Resource to help deliver the reviewer's needs as well will come out of that central resource. We did write, when the reviewer's office was being established, we did write round all departments at the time. It was Robin Swan at the time as minister, wrote round all departments because Emma's role is cross-departmental, wrote round departments at that stage to say would they be prepared to help with the funding. I'm not sure we got any responses, and any responses we did get were quite negative. I fully appreciate the pressures on all budgets, so we have set aside. We will look at what the reviewer puts in by way of a business plan. We will have those conversations through Alan in the office, and then we'll resource what we can going forward.
Is there a way I even want just to even see if there was a website for the autism reviewer to be able to interact? I don't think there's a website. Is there?
That's one of the website, business cards, all logistical type things are some of the major things that they're looking at now, and then say a business plan going forward.
Okay. I remember whenever we produced our committee report, we had spoke about the connections between the Autism Forum and the Autism Reviewer. Is that Autism Forum something that the Autism Reviewer goes to and participates in and is an integral part of?
The reviewer has been at the forum on one occasion to give an overview of the work she was doing. We're refocusing the forum at the minute. The forum to date has been more around information coming to the forum. We're going to refocus the forum in terms of being more a policy development type body to get input from the sector and to get input from other departments around that. Certainly, you may have heard, and that's maybe where the question is coming from, Colin. There was some issue around Emma's attendance at a forum recently, and I've spoken to Emma about that. That was a misunderstanding on my part around attendance at a previous forum and a piece of work being rolled forward. So I've had a conversation with Emma around that. Certainly we're open as part of her engagement work for Emma to attend the forum whenever she believes it's important for her to do so.
And just to add as well, look, the question has been posed to the forum as well about how they want to engage with the reviewer, because as part of this isn't, it may be a department forum that's co-chaired by the department, an autistic advocate, but it's their forum. So kind of the terms of reference, the membership and our aims and objectives, they're very much set by the forum members. So we've had that initial conversation. As Mark said, we are trying to shift it. It is a fantastic vehicle in terms of information dissemination, but where it needs to be is actually a vehicle for policy change and implementation of the strategy. We have a meeting scheduled for May to once again revisit the terms of reference and to pose the question again in a more focused way about engagement with the reviewer, balanced against the new direction for the forum, which is about allowing members to shape policy at the earliest point. The area that we're working currently with them is our framework for children with disabilities and the allocation of the 13 million.
Well, no, it's good to hear, because if it was the spirit and direction of the Assembly that the reviewer should be at that's what we would like to see. And then if it's a case of that's not the case, then we would want to maybe be assessing why and why not. But I'm glad to hear that that's something that will be sorted out going forward. So, Chair, that's grand. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Ella?
Thank you very much for your presentation here today. And I want to focus primarily my questions around children's services. And you said, Nigel, you're coming in a few weeks for an oral briefing about the 13.1 million. Is that correct?
Yes, with a written briefing with you next week.
Okay.
We'll make sure it's with you next week.
So you'd prefer I hold those questions until then, because I do have a number of questions regarding that.
Yeah, I would say some of those questions in terms of what progress has been made since October, what's going to be made in the next number of months, and probably more importantly, the number of respite beds in residential.
I think
those are coming to you in writing, plus verbal briefing.
Yeah, if we can, I'm happy to hold those questions. But, specifics, we got an update the week before last, a written update on some of the progress the week before last, but it wasn't specific with regards to what actually it would do with respite beds, for example. So if we could get those, and if we could also get an update on, I'm going to say, Redwood, is it?
Already there.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I asked the minister regarding the fire regulations and the 50,000 that needs to spend on it. So if we can get those.
No, very much.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to hold
conscious
those.
What we sent to you was an interim update based on the information we had to hand. I didn't want to sit on it any longer because I was conscious you had written to us in October.
Yeah, and I had asked, I think in September I'd asked first, and the minister had said that he was only aware of it 2 weeks, or he wasn't aware of the issue when I asked 2 weeks ago. But we have been asking about some of these issues, and I know I in particular and other party colleagues, for a number of months, so they have been on the agenda. So if you have the answers and they're there, I think it's only fair that you get your place to highlight that too. I have a question on the actual report at 6.1. I'll maybe start with, I'll go in maybe chronological order at 1.2 then first, which I think it's like page 10 and 11 of our our pack, and it's about the emotional children and young people emotional health and well-being framework. And this might seem like kind of like a silly question, but what is the intent of the framework? What does it hope to achieve?
Okay, so what we're looking to do is review autism within the neurodevelopmental approach. We talked about pathways, the 13 existing pathways, move towards a single pathway, and also then a single referral point, and that would follow NICE guidelines. Sometimes in the past, young people would have went through a diagnostic pathway only to get to the end and find out, no, you don't have autism, but you may have ADHD. You need to go on another pathway. So we're currently working with our colleagues in PHA, excuse me, and looking at neurodevelopmental pathways. Scotland have already adopted one. They moved their autism strategy and they've moved towards a neurodevelopmental pathway. So it would be around, and then as referenced, that early support based on identified need. So if it is around toilet and sleep, transitioning, that level of support would be there, and it's not predicated on a confirmed diagnosis. And going back to that level of understanding, sometimes when individuals, be they parents or adults, get a confirmed diagnosis, it just helps them frame and understand the world in which they live in. But this would be very much around dealing with the presenting pressing matters at that point and resourcing them.
And with regards to the you said about the services and that are there to offer, and you going out to consultation, it makes it sound like there will be needed additional funding towards any gaps in those services. And it says on the report that it says completed, so it marks it as completed, that engagements have been completed, so it's going out to consult, I think you said in a number of months, maybe, was it, or something?
What we're looking towards is April. We're pulling together the pre-consultation documents now.
Will it require additional investment if there?
It won't be resource neutral, but it also will mean realignment of existing services and existing supports through the Children and Young People Strategic Planning. We have an early intervention infrastructure through family support hubs. Many of the children and go there initially. But again, it's around reducing duplication, that families aren't going to numerous places and be able to signpost on. And if that is around actually understanding that there is X amount of young people requiring help with sleep, how we can then map that across. And if that, then the intention would be if that can be provided across the region and if families need to maybe move to access that, then looking at how we could provide that support in a more timely manner. There is some money coming down through peace monies that would be coming into this area.
And hopefully that'll then have a direct benefit on
yes,
the
most
families
definitely.
that have them. And the next question is on action. It's on action 6.1 in our briefing. It is page 16. So this is about working with key partners to identify sources of support for siblings of family members who have autism and who are struggling and they need extra services. And it says that it's like the department will provide sources of support for families, and it says that's completed, but it goes on to say that it's through a small grants process across the Northern area, the Northern Trust area. So is that just being done in the Northern Trust, or is that being carried out across all trusts? Because if it's just the Northern, then yes, that action's completed. But if it's not, does that mean that it was only going to be done in one trust? So what's happening in the others?
Certainly that has been done in the Northern Trust area.
Will it be done then in all the other trusts?
And normally what happens within those particular projects is they'll be looked to have an evaluation of the project to see how effective it is, and if it works well then to roll it out in other areas.
Okay. It says here it's completed, and in order for us to go back and make sure that all of the actions and recommendations kind of are followed through, we can follow up and ask about the pilot and the evaluation. Yeah. But I mean, this would read like siblings now can access support in any trust area because of this, but they can't.
Could we read back and clarify that for you?
Yeah.
My understanding, and I will clarify, that was offered to all trust areas, but only the Northern Trust were able to take avail of the funding at that time. But we certainly come back and clarify
And if that's
that
the
for you.
case, I think that's very important, because if that's the case, then we need to actually maybe know why that is in particular, and are there other bodies, or is it the community and voluntary sector who are therefore picking up the pieces on that with regards to the whole family approach? The reason why I asked this question is because we have had a lot of focus, at the latter part of last year on respite provision and how families have been collapsing and now turning to permanent placement of their children, and actually the impact that it's having on the whole family unit and on siblings in particular. And it's not just about one individual, it's about a whole unit. So it's really important that no matter where they live, that they can get it, because if they're not getting respite in order for the whole family to relax, is there anything that they can do for even the siblings themselves? And that's why I kind of wanted to put the focus on that. So I would appreciate if you could
We'll come back to you now.
get feedback. And then the other question that I wanted to ask was on 6.2 of the same page 16, which was about reform of adult social care, about the Social Care Collaborative Forum and the Supporting Carers work stream. And it just says here that the work stream is established and continue to meet quarterly. But I'm wondering if you could give us any more detail with regards to what actions or recommendation the Collaborative Forum have made with regards to autism services, or the provision in particular, what's needed, because it doesn't really,
In terms specifically of services for autistic people, autism services, the Collaborative Forum hasn't made any recommendations at this stage.
Not services, any recommendations in general. I didn't mean to use the word services.
In terms of the Collaborative Forum, it was established to deliver basically, you've heard this before, in terms of the reform of adult social care. What we're currently doing is devising a strategic plan for that work, which will have a 3-year deliverable plan against it. So there'll be measurable targets against each area. There are currently 8 work streams, and we're looking to see whether those work streams are delivering what they should be, if they're the correct work streams, if we need to move things around. Specifically in that one, in terms of the carers, I co-chair that with Anya McGee from Carers NI. It was previously Craig Harrison co-chaired that with me. We have started, I suppose, there were 3 or 4 things on the go under that one. The main one, I suppose, is in terms of the review of the care strategy. So we're just about to get a report. We've engaged the HSE Leadership Centre to undertake a review of the care strategy, because it's 2006 from memory is the care strategy. So we realise it's significantly out of date. That will then give us a report which says, here's the things which we either need to do, what has been done, or where we need to go in the future. That will then go as part of the strategic plan for the Collaborative Forum in terms of how we deliver that wider reform of adult social care. Obviously there was quite a few issues around carers in the reform of adult social care. So that work stream, as it's co-chaired by Anya, it has carers representatives and that on it from young carers as well. And part of the work, one of the other work streams in that was to establish a senior officials group, across departmental senior officials group, and we've looked at the new strategy, not the new strategy. I keep forgetting the name of it. It was the report published by Carers NI around sort of the needs of carers. So we've looked at that as a cross-departmental group and said there's 2 issues. One would be around, I think it was around benefits, and the other one would be around support for young carers. So we had young carers representatives in at the last meeting saying, here's how we think as a system you could support us better. So we're starting to work through that as well. For me, that they're probably the 2 most important parts of that. We've also done a review of what information is available for carers around all trusts and how that can be better coordinated and how it can be better put out. So, but again, happy to give you a report on that if that's helpful.
And we'll probably do that in general at another stage with adult social care in general. But this was just specific in relation to the autism strategy. And my final question is, how do you feel that the Children's Services Cooperation Act is being utilised, or actually if the power of it is being used enough to actually get the departments to work together? Because in this report we have Housing Executive, we have the Department of Education. Do you feel that you're able to pull the leverage of that bill to pull in the other departments?
I'm not sure we're using a bill as leverage. Mars would maybe know more on that specific, but
well, it's a requirement. Okay, a legal requirement on actually cross-departmental working? Is it being utilised?
The context of autism, we're pushing open doors when we're working across departments. Like each department, whether I suppose our biggest interface would be special educational need. We have a number of pieces of work in terms of housing, in terms of supported living, in terms of supported people. Our most significant interface with economy is around transitions, but also succession funding to the Shared Prosperity Fund. And then even infrastructure as well, in terms of community transport and its interface with day opportunities. Each of those departments, autism,
good working relationship,
lots of interfaces, but actually lots of pieces of work. So part of you'll see within the strategy, you're looking at and going, well, those are new pieces of work. That's been driven by the autism strategy. But equally, you're looking at some of the stuff and going, well, there was already a SEND reform programme, but I suppose that there's really good linkages with other pieces of work to get that kind of shared outcome.
I think that's really important in order for it to actually all pull together. Thank you.
Danny?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that. There's obviously a lot of work going on, and it was great to meet the Autism Reviewer last week and just hear about the work she's doing. How well are you working with the Autism Reviewer? Are you working quite closely with her to achieve outcomes?
We are. It would be for Emma, I suppose, to give you her view on how she thinks the relationships are going. It's been, I suppose, establishing a new office like that. We don't really have an example to go with in terms of what the role is or how that role will work. I personally have a very good relationship with Emma. I sat on the panel, I chaired the panel that made the appointment. So I saw her doing her interview, and she was a very capable candidate in my view, and the panel's view. So I've had engagement with her from day one in her post. To be fair, to answer your question brutally honestly, Danny, if I had more time, I could have engaged with her better, and I think Emma would probably reflect that as well. But I do think putting the head of office in is a huge step forward. It will allow a lot of that work, which was being very ably managed by Nigel's team, on top of the work they're doing around the strategy and the monitoring report and all that sort of thing. So I think it could have been better. I'll be honest, it could have been better, but I think from now on it will be established on a firmer footing with that additional person in the office. And I'm not saying it could have been better on a personal basis. It could have been better in terms of probably providing more support to her, in terms of trying to get her established. Colin's already mentioned the website. We were working on that, but the staff were doing that and a dozen other things at the same time. So there's some things which we could have done better. I think if Emma's she would be honest and say there's at times communication between the two of us could have been better on both sides, and that's been reflected and that's been accepted. But as a department, we're fully committed to the role of the reviewer. We see huge benefits in it. We see huge challenges in it in terms of the challenge she will bring with it to us, and that's good as well. Absolutely. But we also see a good opportunity in terms of, as we start to develop the next series of delivery plans around that engagement, around the priorities where she believes as a department and as a system we need to be focusing. So those conversations will be ongoing as we start to develop the next set of delivery plans.
Just to add, it was the opportunity piece that Mark mentioned at the end. Really valued the independence and the scrutiny that Emma's able to bring to the autism strategy. This is really timely for us in terms of shifting to developing the final 3 years of the autism strategy in terms of its delivery plan. I could say that in my opening remarks, we could be stronger in terms of measurable targets. That's a big piece of work. I think we could be saying more in terms of waiting lists. Those are areas we'll be focusing on. We'll be looking at mental health in terms of actually improving equity of access. But being able to do that with the support of independent scrutiny, as opposed to us marking our own homework, it's an opportunity that we're grabbing with both hands. So
glad to hear that. That's very healthy. Sounds like a healthy relationship.
Absolutely.
You mentioned mental health there, and initially, Nigel, you had mentioned that departmental policy that people with autism were seen in mainstream mental health services. Is that the case?
Yeah, so I suppose we've looked at this very closely, cognizant that there was a motion recently in the Assembly on the basis, the proposal for a specialist service for mental health service for autistic people. Now, as we were kind of looking at the positions, but part of their starting position to this is the mental health strategy, and the mental health strategy sets out very clearly that we should be treating people based on their mental health needs, not their characteristics. And it's not considered, I suppose, the position within that strategy that was guided very much by evidence and professional opinion is that it was not appropriate to create a disaggregated, segregated system for autistic people. Now, we revisited that position ahead of the motion only a few months ago. I think it was January, a month ago. Very much looking through NICE guidelines, Royal College of Psychiatry, Psychology, Royal College of Nursing, service models from the South and Great Britain, and NHS England. The evidential position remains, and the professional position remains, that autistic people are generally best supported within a mainstream service that is reasonably adjusted and autism aware. For those that do have a coexisting diagnosis of learning disability, the evidential position remains that those individuals are usually best supported within a specialist mental health service, and that exists. There's holes within it in terms of community and inpatient, but it does exist. That's your Muckamore, your Dorsey, your Hollywell, your Lakeview. And actually, in terms of those inpatient units, most of the individuals currently receiving assessment and treatment have a coexisting diagnosis of autism.
Certainly, we are very much aware, and Orlia touched on this earlier, about the higher rates of mental health conditions within the population of people with autism, including anxiety, depression, self-harm, and even suicide, which is obviously very distressing for their families and the population as a whole. So will that be a position that you would revisit or keep an eye on, the provision of a specialist mental health service for people with autism?
Certainly, that's what we do concede is that the current system, the current adult mental health service, could serve individuals better. Certainly equity of access is not always there, and certainly based on, I suppose the data is limited within Northern Ireland, but I think we can look at both data within the Republic, Great Britain, and actually beyond. It's fair to say that those inequalities would be just as applicable to Northern Ireland as what they would be in their regions. So we need to address the equity of access piece. I mean, there are specialist services that autistic people will access, things like substance misuse, eating disorders. Those are specialist services within our adult mental health service, but also within our CAMHS service as well. So there will be times where it's appropriate to access a specialist service. But currently, the position is that to have a specialist mental health service segregated or disaggregated from the adult mental health or the child mental health service is not considered appropriate, as I said, based on policy, evidence, and professional opinion. But that's something that will be continuously reviewed, along with the equity of access piece, which is huge.
And I think as well, sorry, just to say, in terms of improvement, the training we referred to last time we met in Middletown is part of our process, whereby if autistic people are using the mainstream services, we had to ensure that the staff there are competent and have training available to them, and that's part of that process as well.
That was my next question. Let's see. With that training, is that training mandatory?
No, that training is not mandatory at the moment. The Minister has said that he is minded that it should be mandatory. We hadn't originally conceived, and I think when we presented to the committee before, we'd in fact said that it wasn't mandatory.
Training is available to GPs and other healthcare professionals. It's not currently mandatory, but the Minister is considering it.
So this is training that will be launched. The Middletown training will be launched from April onwards. The GP training is already launched, and I suppose we're monitoring uptake. I think part in terms of our next part of our delivery plan is we need to assess uptake on the GP surgery piece and the actual feedback and usefulness of it. The Middletown training, for lack of a better description, it rolls out from April onwards. We'd see it as scaling up from June in terms of the two other modules. I suppose, yes, we've already received a bit of challenge from this about mandatory and optional training. This is training the health and social care professionals have asked for. Cutting across nearly every professional discipline, from social workers, nursing and beyond. Professionals are saying they're struggling to understand the needs of people with autism and how to best support them and what adjustments they can make. So I suppose we're hopeful that appetite's out there for training, that will very much drive high uptake.
And we can monitor the uptake as well, and that will help us. And if we discover, for example, that it's not being widely taken, then I think the case for it being mandatory gets stronger.
GP training isn't mandatory, or?
I will have to come back to you on it, but I can't imagine it would be mandatory, as it would have to be written into a GP contract, which I don't think has been looked at for a while. But allow me to come back to you in writing on that.
Thank you, Nigel. One of the things you'll be very aware of is the transition period, and I know we've had conversations about it previously. It's something that a lot of parents come to us with children with additional needs as they're approaching their 19th birthday. How do children, young people in Northern Ireland with additional needs compare to the rest of the UK when it comes to terms of transition?
We have, I suppose, in terms of our work, in terms of the adult learning disability service model and then our focus work, so we've established a subgroup in terms of transitions. Because part of this, for me, there's two parts of transitions. One, we need to get HSC transitions better. So, I mean, no doubt you've encountered in terms of what you've heard from your constituents. They can appear within a trust that children's services and adult services are almost two separate organisations. You know, so that the focus with that piece on our HSC transitions is to very much address that in a regionally consistent way. Our trusts do need to get better in terms of transitions. They know about children from a very young age. They shouldn't act surprised when they turn 18. So part of that's about using data better. But equally, look, we have to concede that on single year budgets, you may have good side of your population. It's very difficult to actually have services ready for them. I'm not answering your question directly, but I'll come to it. The second part then is actually the cross-departmental piece. We need to look at transitions beyond the inevitable acceptance that people are going to daycare and staying in the family home for their whole life. Particularly with autism, probably less of a consideration with autism, but for those with learning disability and autism, that is an inevitable trajectory. We've been working, I suppose, closely with education, but more recently with economy in terms of Caleb's cause, and then communities as well in terms of housing benefits and the, I suppose, wider access piece, to start looking at that. How do we actually enable truly meaningful transitions as set out in Equal Lives in 2005? How do we enable people to have the actual choice about where they're going to live, what they're going to do after school, and how health and social care will support them along the way, and how infrastructure will join all the dots up? We did look at other jurisdictions in this, and so yes, there's certainly different legislative frameworks that potentially aid transitions, particularly, I suppose, and this does very much link to Caleb's cause in terms of the educational and healthcare plans that are enshrined within legislation. So if legislation could potentially be a tool that helps actually core, because there's activity happening all over our departments in terms of transitions. It's a recognised policy challenge. So legislation potentially allows us to join that up. I suppose one of the advantages they do have across the water is, of course, that they have services brought together within local authorities. So you have social care and education much closer together than what you do in Northern Ireland. However, they do still have issues in terms of transitions. It's a policy challenge in England, Scotland, Wales, as much as it is in Northern Ireland. So I suppose what I'm saying to you is, yes, we're looking beyond Northern Ireland to try and find solutions to this, but it's a long-standing challenge to actually enable people. For me, it's around choice and control. You know, how can everyone have the same choices we did? And how can health and social care, particularly with these populations, how can health and social care help and open doors, as opposed to that mindset that health will always be with them and they can meet all their needs, which we can't.
No, I appreciate that, and your reference to Caleb's cause. Certainly, there's a lot of parents who come into that type of environment and have raised cases with us, particularly access to benefits. I know the Child Trust Fund one is one that has been raised with us, where children are not able to access the Child Trust Fund because they have to go through a controllership. Parents have to get a controllership, which is an expensive legal process, and obviously very stressful then as well. Is there anything you can do to support those parents?
We're actually looking at the issue of controllership quite recently. So look, we've actually maintained Alma White met listener, I think, maybe 3+ months ago. But since that point, we've actually maintained a regular conversation with Alma.
There is progress there.
Yeah, because certainly, I mean, this initially starts a legislative campaign, but as we've been working with Alma and the families that she's engaging with, we're starting to get a much more granular understanding of what these issues look like, because quite bluntly, when we've looked at transitions, you can look at things and go, well, things are happening too late. And people are, they're not getting opportunities, but when you start getting into the actual individual family experiences, you're able to see what needs to be addressed. So no, controllership's actually an area we're looking at presently.
Thank you. I have one other quick question, if you don't mind, Chair. Just a quick question. Mid and East Antrim Council had an autism-friendly area introduced a couple of years ago. I'm just wondering, does the department have any view on that? Or is it not something you're aware of?
Not something I'm aware of, Danny, but certainly if you can provide us information on it, we'll come back to you. Certainly. Thank you.
I would like to think everywhere in the north could and should be autism friendly. Certainly where we want to move towards. Diane?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So just going back to the previous conversation, so you're looking at controllership. What are you looking at? What are the ideas?
Well, at this stage, it would be very early. It's an issue that we've had float to us. I'm conscious, I think there's an interface with Department of Justice, but I suppose at the moment, conversations and the work's quite exploratory. I can certainly come back to you in writing about what the scope of that work will look like, but it forms part of our overall work in terms of trying to understand what are the barriers in terms of transitions, and what does the Department of Health need to do from our end, but equally what do other departments need to do from theirs. So apologies, I know that's not the detail that you're looking for, but I can come back to you in writing.
Right, I think it's important, and I'll tell you why. I mean, I have a lot of sympathy for this cause, and for the idea that we must have some legal provision for young people as they transfer from children's to adult services, and what their outlook is like after 18, 19. Because, and I've noticed this with friends, you know, where a young person, the story of a friend, a young person going to Fleming Fulton, had a very full life in Fleming Fulton, very complex needs, very full life in Fleming Fulton, went to school every day, 8 o'clock to whatever, 4, half 4, 2 nights a week was at youth club, etc. And come 18, 2 half days in a day centre. That was it. That broke his parents and broke him. And that's just not good enough. It is just not good enough. So, and I know that you're all having conversations about it, and I know economy, education, and communities and yourselves are all having conversations about it, but we'd really like to know, what are they, just conversations about conversations, or what is being proposed in those conversations? You know, the education and healthcare plan in England isn't without its problems, but it is a legal guarantee of something. And I think that young people with autism and or learning disability deserve something more than they currently have. So, you know, the controllership issue, I'd like somebody to come back and say what we can do on it. I'd like to know exactly what the conversations are. Where are they going to lead to? What's your view? Do you think legislation is an appropriate vehicle for this? Because I just think without the legal enforcement of legislation, it will be almost impossible to get 4 departments to play with it.
Okay, I'll come back to in a few points. Right, the engagement piece. Yes, they're more than conversations. I'll come back to you on the controllership point as agreed. I suppose, like, where our conversations have been most meaningful, we're currently supportive of the work that DFE are leading on in terms of scoping legislation and the gaps in our current legislation, which will ultimately identify options in terms of legislative change. We have been, in terms of our regional transitions protocol, engaging with education and DFE to give them sight of what our approach will be. But this was very much starting that we need to get the HSC piece right first before we can actually create that platform to interface well with education, economy, housing, and wider. But our regional protocol, I mean, that is a significant piece of work that was done with trusts and eventually brought in education and economy that looked at how we were transitioning children currently. And Diane, no doubt when you speak to your constituents, it's the same story. It's left very late in the day. Yeah. I mean, it's not unusual to hear about a transition happening at 18 when it should be happening at 14, and that's what's set out in terms of NICE guidelines.
Absolutely.
Now, not every child needs a transitions plan at 14. Some can wait later, but There's lots of children where that planning does need to start at 14 because we need to think about accommodation-based support.
Yeah.
We need to actually think about meaningful day activity, and I'll come to that point now. Yes, certainly we're aware that actually there can be quite a stark drop in service for people that are within special school, like you say, availing of youth clubs, and then coming into an adult learning disabilities area service, a service that is stretched quite
For adults.
significantly. Yeah,
Yes,
coming with
for
adults.
Yeah.
So and look, that adult learning disability day service is stretched quite significantly, and there's a number of reasons for that. And quite simply, the population has grown over the past number of decades, but the service hasn't. We have seen increased complexity of people coming within the service. So you may have been able to support, say, 30 people within a setting. That has now been reduced to, say, 15 or 20 because some individuals require higher levels of staff and maybe need to be separated from the rest of the people supported within the site. So capacity is being constrained. That inevitably then results in scenarios like you very much articulated, Diane, that families are then only able to access a partial service. And equally then, I suppose I've also spoke to special school teachers that have bumped into their former pupils and have equally been dismayed where they've built up so much capacity and independence, but because of a lacking set of choices around day opportunities, inevitably young people are going into daycare when they're capable of so much more.
Yes.
And for them, it's really disheartening, in terms of the relationship they've built, the independence and the capacity. Everything that we're doing around the day care, day opportunity space has been, I suppose, it's enshrined with our ongoing work in terms of the learning disability service model. It's very much recognised. Look, we need to modernise daycare. We need environments that can flex for that higher level of complexity so that capacity isn't constrained when an individual may require higher levels of staff or may have behavioural issues that may need to be supported in a different way. We need to expand day opportunities, and we need to actually we need to shift away such dependence and inevitability around daycare. There is still a place for daycare, just to be clear, but we really need to expand day opportunities, and this for me is a cross-government piece to actually enable people to have much greater choice and control about their day activity, where they want to do it, when. People have lives after 9 to 5, and where as well. And that needs to be done to actually provide that choice and control piece, to actually start, I suppose, Dan, to very much address that example, but it's not a unique example. It can be quite common across our trusts. I suppose the position on the legislation, we will be very much aligned to what our Minister has said. He is supportive of Caleb's cause and the work that's been progressed by DFE in terms of exploring legislative change. As in terms of the evidence we gave earlier, certainly in terms of all those dots between SEN, between supported employment, community transport, our work in HSC in terms of the service model, legislation could be a tool in terms of trying to join those up so that they are not isolated pieces of work that are solely dependent on departmental collaboration and engagement.
I'm encouraged by that, and I'm going to take it as a yes. And you can talk to everybody else with you afterwards.
It was a politician's answer, Diane, I think.
My minister's going to sack me.
So I want to, can I focus just for a minute on the HSE issues, because I think those are massively important as well. One of the things I've discovered as I've delved into health policy is the massive difference in provision across trusts. And trust boundaries become like the Berlin Wall when it comes to provision for young adults with autism, stroke, learning disability, or any issue really. How are you going to work? And you talk about getting the HSE position right, but it isn't right that a young person in the Southern Trust can avail of some respite, but if they moved 5 miles down the road into the Southeastern Trust, it would all be taken off them. It just isn't right, and I've known this to happen, so it's fact. It's an enormous strain on families. So how can we get that right? That's number one. And I suppose number two, and this is actually another case that comes within the constituency, young person with autism, but is told she can't access CAMS. Now, I'm interested that today I've heard something very, very different. So I certainly will go back with that as an affirmative that of course they can if it's deemed suitable. But I think parents are not given the choices to access CAMS as well as autism services, because one, there's a huge waiting list for CAMS, and two, well, sure, you've been seen by somebody anyway, whether it's appropriate or not. So I do want to explore those two issues.
Let's start with the first one. I'll come to the CAMS.
Thanks. In terms of consistency of service, so probably the two pieces around consistency of service in terms of LD and or autism. Very much that post that commenced today in terms of the adult lead for commissioning for autism, that will be a piece of work that they're going to have to grapple with quite quickly. I suppose the big challenge in terms of adult autism services is there isn't actually a lot there as a starting point. In terms of learning disability services then, like the big consistency piece, and this is one of the core aims of the work, is the work that we're progressing around the adult learning disability service model. Now look, where that works at present, and when I met with you last year, I was really quite hopeful that we would be at consultation at this stage. We have a model that our 5 trusts are agreed to, that are signed up to. That in itself, in terms of regional consensus, is huge. The work that we've been progressing over the past number of months, and it is hard work, it's slow work, is to actually develop an implementation plan. Because for me to be able to come to say to you, I'm thinking of all of those things, regionally consistent approach to transitions, annual health checks and GP surgeries, flexible short breaks, expanded day ops, those are words on a page. They'll stay words on a page unless we get the implementation plan right. We need to actually think about why some of these things haven't happened. Because some of them were set with an equal 20 years ago. So that's, I suppose we're still in the trenches with that piece of work, but I am hopeful we'll be out to consultation fairly soon. So that's about ensuring regional consistency. But to address your second point in terms of, I suppose, accessing packages, in terms of being in one trust area and moving to another. And this is, I suppose, an issue that's unique to learning disability or autism services. It cuts across all programmes of care. These services are very much commissioned on a localised basis to meet localised need, and trusts will be responsible to provide services through their delegated statutory functions to their local populations. I think to address this issue, one, either we need to regionalise all our services, which would be a massive undertaking, but actually ensuring equity of the level of services provided at trusts means that when families move, they aren't moving to a trust that has no short breaks beds. They do. And they become part of that local need. So I'm not that's not a quick issue to address, but it's something that we need to address in terms of the adult autism lead and in terms of the service model. In terms of the CAMS piece, do you mind?
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, certainly there are young people across all our CAMS services with autism, either confirmed diagnosis or on an autistic diagnostic waiting list. CAMS is a specialist mental health service. In terms of from steps 3 and onwards. I did reference, we have a regionally agreed threshold for access to those services, and if they are met, then that's the threshold on which young people access CAMS, and it's not parental choice that parents want their children seen. It's based on those regionally agreed threshold. The step care pathway operates across 5 steps, and first being universal prevention. And I'm looking at the prevention as better cure in terms of the Committee for Health. If a child has anxiety, come back to my point earlier, and is anxious because of whatever is going on in their life, and may or may not have autism, then there needs to be support and help given at that time. Otherwise, that will become an ingrained, long-standing, and potential mental health issue. So in terms of, can't speak to that individual case or that individual family, but there are regionally agreed thresholds, and it's the CAMS pathway is in the public domain and can be accessed.
Can I just ask a final question then? One of the issues that I come up against over and over again, I'm sure every committee member does, is the issue of getting access to social workers for families who have children with autism or young people with autism. And I had this conversation this week in the Southern Trust on a specific issue. And I was kind of felt stonewalled by it, which was, we just have a list and you just have to wait on the list. Some of these families can't really wait on a list. And it's very, very difficult for them. And is there no specific, I mean, there's a learning disability service, but particular people I'm thinking of cross those learning disability, autism, they cross both, and have no social worker. And I'm told they're just on the list and they'll have to wait on it. Are we doing anything about this?
If this is a question around waiting lists, there will be waiting lists, regrettably, for some of the services. And that's the position in terms of, and that can be related to either the volume of work or to the position in terms of whether or not there are staff vacancies and workforce issues. But that is something which is very, very closely monitored, the piece which is about the workforce.
It's not really an answer, sure it's not.
Well, it's.
I could have given that answer.
Well, I mean, without knowing, well, it's very difficult when you don't know specifics.
Well, I'm not going
appropriate. No, it's not appropriate for it either.
This specific case, but this is a general issue. I suspect it's a general issue across Northern Ireland, where families are in fairly crisis mode, and access to appropriate social work is impossible for them, and you know, some of these families will inevitably cross that kind of autism learning disability barrier. They'll generally be in that area, the ones I'm thinking of. Surely we do need to start to look at how we address that, because that also impacts on the mental health of that person, and impacts on the wider family. Is there any work going on to address any of that with the general social work, and the review of children's services even?
Well, there will be within the trust the triaging of waiting lists, where trust will be checking waiting lists to see whether or not how the circumstances are for people that are on the waiting list, whether they've deteriorated. So there are initiatives going on in terms of that. There will also be opportunities then maybe to refer families on to other types of services while they're waiting for a social worker. So there are, and certainly workforce is an issue, Diane, and there is considerable work going on just in terms of workforce, because that's part of the reality of the situation, is that we do in certain trusts and within certain teams struggle to fill positions.
And just to add as well, I think we may have to come back to you in writing, because I'm conscious social worker vacancies in unallocated cases will cut across multiple programmes of care. You're ranging from children's disability services. So children's disability services also work across both learning disability and autism, so they don't separate them in terms of programmes of care. It will happen at adults, but not in children's. But look, that social work issue starts, applicable to children's disability teams, but also older people's services, and so getting people out of hospital. So allow us to come back to, because I think there's probably a more cohesive piece about how we address our social work vacancies and address the unallocated cases across multiple programmes of care.
I know, Diane, as well, the Office of Social Services are doing significant work in terms of trying to do exactly what you say, tackle the workforce. I think children's services have been particularly challenging in terms of social work vacancies, and work is ongoing to try and address that, and in terms of potentially looking at new training places as well, which continues to bring more social work places into the system. But to be fair, it is outside our remit. It would sit within the Office of Social Services, but I work very closely with Anya Morrison and some of these issues in terms of the impact of this work on social work. But I think, to be fair to your question, Diane, would probably need to come back in writing. I'll get Anya or the OSS staff to come back in writing, if that's okay. I don't think we're going to do justice to answer your question, if I'm honest.
No, that's fine. I'm quite happy. You can't always anticipate the sort of questions that everybody will ask us. That's totally fine. I would be really concerned if we were saying that we would only get a social worker as the situation deteriorates. We are meant to try to help prevent the crisis as well, and that is in adults and young people with autism. And I'm not sure that we've got that right. But
And I think that takes us back to our earlier discussion around the importance of early intervention and early support for families. And I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to imply that people wouldn't get a service unless things deteriorated to a terrible point. I was rather just saying that it's important to keep an eye on what's happening within waiting lists, as opposed to just putting someone on a waiting list and leaving them there without any check-in to see how they are, what's going on.
Fair enough.
Because you do make a good point. Sometimes those things can deteriorate to the point, and if no one's noticing, an important opportunity to intervene is missed. And you were
Thank
quite
you,
right
guys.
to point. Sorry.
Okay. Happy enough, Diane?
yes, thank you.
Okay, so we'll look forward to that written response. Alan?
Thanks, Chair. And Chair, I certainly share your concern about the waiting list for the referrals, the 3 years for children, 7 years for adults. And gentlemen, thank you for your brief, and I admire and support all the work that you're doing. But in my journey through earlier adulthood, I wouldn't have heard the word autism mentioned very much, and I wouldn't have recognised the symptoms of what are now described as autism in my circle at that time. But yet, in recent decades, it seems to be the case that every other family that I become involved with, they have a family member who either has a statement of autism or is waiting on a statement of autism. Now, in your background document, number 6, there's a paragraph that starts with the words, "The department recognises the growing prevalence of autism in our society." And I'm just wondering, are you aware, is there any sort of national research or international research to establish if there's any external influences at work that would be contributing to this growing prevalence of autism? And could you maybe tell me, do the numbers of cases in Northern Ireland, are they broadly in line with other regions of the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland?
Okay, I suppose the short answer, are we aware of any external factors? There's nothing there in a robust way that would give us kind of an understanding of why we're seeing growth in the population. I suppose we know just in terms of the past number of decades, there's certainly been much improved awareness of autism, much better diagnosis. Waiting lists aside, we're better at diagnosing. There are some statistics that we can lean on within Northern Ireland in terms of the census, number of people self-reporting as autistic or a family member autistic is 35,000. The skill census that we lean on quite heavily, because it is quite a robust data set, would indicate that 5% of our children's population are autistic. It's quite robust for a number of reasons in terms of its methodology, but also because skill's mandatory. In terms of the other interface points in your life after school, those things aren't mandatory, so it becomes very challenging after that point to have an actual robust prevalence number, whereas we all have to go to school. So that 5% is more robust than what we previously had. Now, I've mentioned in terms of my opening remarks that we have variation in terms of our diagnostic rates. They vary between around 2 to 7.9%. That's quite a significant variance in trusts, I'd say around roughly a factor of 4. We need to look into that more. Clearly we can't have such differences in our population for such a small population over such a small geographical area, so we're interrogating that more. The World Health average is 2%, so the trust that's reporting 3% is closer to world average. The trust that's near 8%, no. So we need to understand what's driving that. It could be this could be our population, but equally, I've mentioned previously there is a mindset that we need to get families need to get a diagnosis or a SEND statement to access support. It's not a mindset; it's a reality. Lots of things are locked behind closed doors until you get the bit of paper. And yes, Chair, you've mentioned the diagnosis can be the start of a journey. It can bring clarity to a family. But we shouldn't be locking support in health or education behind those pieces of paper. And that is potentially what is feeding into some of our diagnosis pressures, is that until families can get that bit of paper, and I'm conscious families are, in the absence of accessing this via the NHS, they're going private for this. And with my son's own friends at school, there's a number of families that are going through that private journey because the alternative is waiting for 3 years for their children to get support. So, yeah, suppose this is something that we're looking into in much greater detail. The area we're focusing most on is those diagnostic variances between trusts. I think once we get a much more robust understanding of our population, it is then trying to understand what's potentially driving this. And they take your point of external factors.
In terms of actual documented diagnosed cases that obviously you would have on record, are we broadly in line with the rest of the United Kingdom and Republic of Ireland? Or have we more recorded cases or less recorded cases?
In terms of population, we would have higher. Obviously, I mean, across UK, the demand on autism services is similar. There's more people presenting across all ages. For us, and we referenced the emotional health and wellbeing framework at the start in terms of the pathways. Sometimes there's overshadowing, so it may be this or it may be that. But so we're looking towards the neurodevelopmental to rule in and to rule out. So we need to have a better developmental history taken. We need then to understand what's up, because some of the overlap, there can be other conditions that can mask in terms of autistic presentations.
We do publish stats, Alan, on a yearly basis on the department's website, and that's in terms of school-age children. It doesn't give an analysis across jurisdictions, but it does give analysis in terms of urban, rural, and areas of deprivation, male, female, so that those stats are published on a yearly basis. The last ones, I think, are for 2023, which were published May 23, so there should be... Well, there's maybe a more up-to-date one there for May 24.
There is a gap in that census. It didn't take place in 1 year due to industrial action. That issue has been remedied, and that census took place in October.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Danny, I'm line in for a quick question and a quick answer.
Really appreciate it, Chair. Thank you very much. I just wanted to build on something that Maurice was asking or talking about there. You're saying that people who are waiting on support on waiting lists were being triaged. I just wondered if you could tell us quickly how that triage happens.
So social worker checking in to see how they are and what the issues are and have things got any better or any worse.
So they are engaged with regularly?
Yeah.
That's very good to hear.
Sorry, Danny, just very quickly. So if they're on a waiting list deemed in requiring social work, the trusts have governance and it may be allocated to a senior social worker, so somebody has sights and eyes on those individuals, and that would be some of the assurances that we monitor through SPPG, how they monitor those active waits in terms of...
The people are being engaged with? They're being contacted and engaged with, or is it just done?
Sometimes they can just be on the phone and... I mean, it wouldn't be the same, obviously, Danny, as a full engagement with the family.
There is a
there
level
is
of
a check-in,
engagement.
yeah. It's not a perfect system, but I mean, I think it's important that
It's
people are,
yeah.
if they're on that waiting list, they have clearly got needs, and we just need to make sure that they're not getting worse.
I really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chair. Just Nigel, just on the cross-departmental piece on transitions that you referred to with Diane and Danny earlier. Can you end maybe on a high note that on that cross-departmental work, will there be a pilot transition? Is there any discussions on that? Particularly for those kids that, I mean, that some of the language that we've heard from Alma and those parents, they're grieving. They're grieving when they leave school. And they're put into a care centre, and you know those care centres, the current care centres, the pressures that they're under now, and the pressures are going to be under in 20 years' time. Is there any work ongoing for a transition pilot that you can reveal to us today?
Quite simply, I suppose in terms of the HSC regional protocol, it's moving to pilot. So that will be piloted, I imagine, within one trust area, and part of that transitions piece will need to interact then with the Education Authority, supported employment, everything around that region to test that transitions approach. That will then form the cross-departmental piece, but we anticipate that this will move to pilot. The protocol has been agreed with trusts, both between adult and children's services. I would see it happening within the coming months. Hopefully that's a high enough note.
Okay, that is a high note. I think, I mean, the issues that we've raised today are all very important. The campaign of Alma I think Caleb's cause is, I think everybody, all MLAs are fully in support of it, and we do want to see action being taken forward as quickly as possible. So that is a relatively high note to end on. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for coming before us and taking our questions. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, members, so just moving on then to item number 7.
Next week, Nigel.
SL1, which is the Health and Personal Social Services Optical Charges and Payments. Can I refer everybody to tab 7, and there's a clerk's memo at page 116. The Department is proposing to make a statutory rule that will increase the value of optical vouchers issued to certain patients to help towards the cost of glasses or contact lenses under the health service. The Department hopes to bring these regulations into operation as soon as possible. So this statutory rule will be subject to negative resolution procedure. Happy to take comments before asking if we're content. This is an annual thing that pretty much is straightforward, so I don't see any issue. Okay, I do say. I don't see it. No,
you don't see any problem with an optical charges. There's irony there.
Well, you stole,
no, you do see problems.
You stole my joke. I don't see anything now. So I don't. Can I just get clarity, because this is again another serious issue. We're content with the merits of the policy, and the Department makes a statutory rule. Content. Thank you.
Can I just go back to, sorry, I didn't want to ask the question
to
of people in the room.
Okay.
Sometimes asking a question if you dispute something that they've said doesn't sort of go down too well, but there was just something they said there, and I don't know if I picked it up wrong, but they said that the sort of either UK or world average for autism was 2%, and one of our trusts it's 8%. Yeah. And then there was just nothing that followed from that. And I'm just wondering, maybe could we write to them and sort of ask, is there some way, if something is 4 times the world average, I think maybe we should be kind of going, right, is somebody, not to go back to the joke about looking at it, but is somebody just taking a look at that and examining it and saying, is there something different happening there? Is there more people doing diagnosis? Is there cohorts or something? But I just think it would be amiss of us not to just ask a question, sort of almost throwaway comment that somewhere...
To be fair to them, they did say they were looking into it, but so I do think, it does no harm for us to follow up and writing that we...
Given that some countries don't actually...
I think the World Health average would be a wrong one to take.
It just didn't feel like it was pinned down. There was an explanation then given in the second answer that just didn't. I just feel like it didn't. It answered something, but I'm not sure what it answered.
Okay. So no, I think we should. They did say they were looking into it. I think we should write the back of it. So when they do look into it, that they come back to us. So moving on to item number 8. Assembly Research Services. So we're going to get an oral briefing on our own inquiry into access to palliative care services. Can I refer members to papers at tab 8 that includes a paper by Assembly Research Services on the introduction to palliative and end of life care, page 120. So can I welcome Dr. Grania Creeley, who's the researcher within RAISE, and invite Grania to give us a summary of her paper, and then we're going to have an opportunity to ask questions that members may have. So Grania, over to yourself.
Well, you're going to be delighted to hear that I'm not giving a briefing of the paper that's in the pack. I'm just going to give an overview very quickly of a series of papers that we have upcoming over the next couple of weeks, which are going to hopefully guide you through the evidence base related to the inquiry. So the paper that's in your pack, that's really just an introductory paper. It looks at, why is palliative care and end-of-life care important? Why is the demand for these services increasing and estimated to increase so much over the next 20 years? We look at the context regarding moving things from one sector to another, and we also look at a little bit about the policy landscape. But again, all of these things you will already be very familiar with given the meetings that you've had and the visits you've had. Looking forward to the next papers that are coming along roughly every 2 weeks. The next paper we have is on quality of care, public perceptions and patient and family experiences. So we give you an overview of current services within Northern Ireland for both children and adult services. We explore quality of care in relation to the National Audit of End of Life Care, really, and that's for specialist hospital-based services. That's an NHS benchmarking approach. So essentially we can look backwards and see how Northern Ireland is improving or changing relative to the audits that have went before. But we can also look to the other jurisdictions and see how we compare and in what particular areas perhaps we could improve and what has put in place for that. With respect to patient and family experiences and attitudes, we know these all impact on the different barriers to provision of services and equity. So what we really do there is look at what survey evidence is really specific to Northern Ireland, what has been carried out. So we look at some surveys that have come from the University of Ulster and also from the Nicholas study. We then move on to something that you'll probably be very interested in, which is the funding mechanisms relating to palliative and end-of-life care. So we'll give you a briefing just on what is the current situation, so a snapshot, but we'll also look at issues relating to cost effectiveness and cost saving, essentially with palliative and end-of-life care. A lot of moving of services from secondary care out into the community, which is the aim, is really predicated upon cost savings being able to be made in terms of reducing the number of A&E beds, bed days that are used and services there. A lot of the evidence on that in terms of cost savings and cost effectiveness, you have to be quite careful sometimes about the methodological aspect of that and be aware of the perspective that was taken in the study, because what you don't want to do really is be in a situation where you're really just moving costs from one sector to another, perhaps putting them across into primary care or moving them onto unpaid carers, which obviously there's implications there. One of my colleagues, Sinead McMurray, she's going to present evidence based on best practice from other jurisdictions. So whenever you look at commissioning of palliative and end-of-life care services in other areas, what are they doing right? What incentives are there in place such that these remuneration systems can result in higher quality of care and also efficiencies in terms of monetary savings? Our paper 4 is on equity and accessibility of services. So again, we're looking at inequities perhaps in provision between rural and urban areas. We're looking at the evidence base really that says, well, you know, what are these inequities and what has been done elsewhere to try and break down any of the barriers that are there that result in equitable access not being achieved across regions. Finally, we come sort of full circle and look at estimating future demand. Obviously, this is quite important because we need to know where the services are going to be needed. And this relates back to what we were talking about, which is the barriers to access, whether it's socioeconomic, whether it's to do with deprivation, etc. So we end up then sort of looking at workforce planning, but also looking ahead as well. What technologies are coming down the line and what has been done elsewhere that could potentially influence quality of care in the future and cost effectiveness of that care to release savings. Now, obviously, these are a series of bite-sized briefings that are going to be delivered alongside the evidence that you're hearing. If there are any gaps there that you see or any other things that you might be interested in hearing about, obviously let us know. We can take that into account.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So I had a number of questions wrote down to ask you, but they were on specific issues which I now realise I'm not going to ask you because you're here to talk about the process. You're going to come, you or your colleagues are going to come forward and discuss in detail these papers.
Various aspects.
Yes, and we can ask questions then. So that's very clear and it's very, very useful, and I appreciate you for giving that brief summary. So given that I'm doing that, I'm asking any members who come in that they don't get into the detail of this stuff, which we will. So if you have a question on the process, certainly I can take that, Nuala.
I just wanted to say, ask one quick question and say that it's very helpful because there, we want to make sure that we do an inquiry that is quite in depth, and not all of us can make every visit to all of the providers and in the community because of conflicts with other committees. So it's really important that we do have this backup work as well. One particular area that was the specialised palliative care, because in figure 1, the causes of death and mortality in NI, it said leading cause of death, all persons. It says dementia and Alzheimer's 11.7%. And leading cause of death in women, dementia and Alzheimer's 15.4%, which seems like quite high numbers. And I think there's maybe a bit of an education piece there for us as a committee with regards to why that's so high, but are there any specialised palliative care services for those?
Yeah, and I really do think if you've had a look at the paper, if you've had a chance to look at it, you know, generally estimation of demand for palliative care services in the past has been related to mortality and demography. You know, we've got an ageing population, but more and more it's to do with multimorbidity, which is concentrated in old age. But what we're also finding is that multimorbidity is shifting earlier, where you've got people who are getting or who have multiple conditions much earlier. And so when you look at the estimation of demand going forward, I think it was 20 years, it was something like, I think, 139,000 additional people would be able to, well, 90% of those would be able to avail or would benefit from palliative and end-of-life care services. You know, it's no longer, as you know, related to cancer, it's chronic life-limiting conditions. But with dementia, what you're going to have is a situation where perhaps the services are going to have to be slightly different, because not only are they going to maybe have dementia, but there's other comorbidities alongside that are difficult to treat.
Yeah, well, that would be good if the specialised kind of palliative care could include work on or a piece and background research on that as well. Yeah. Thank you.
So I mean, I think just given that Dr. Creeley has said that, you know, there may be gaps in that, so if members have suggestions, I mean, I suggest we write to the clerk and then we can get that to you in terms of making a fuller representation. Diane?
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. No, just really, again, it's fine. I will get the clerk to set this out. It's just really about the legal position, about the right to palliative care, and where we are in Northern Ireland vis-a-vis the rest of the United Kingdom. And we had touched on this morning. My understanding is that in the rest of the United Kingdom, in some shape or form, there is a legal right to palliative care, which drives the commissioning of palliative care services. I'd just like more detail on that.
Well, I can give you
Does that make sense to you? Yeah.
Yeah, well, no, I can give you a bit of detail on that now. Essentially, integrated care boards in England have a responsibility to commission, a statutory responsibility to commission palliative and end-of-life care services, but there is no minimum specification. And so what you actually find is, even though there is a requirement for them to commission it, that does not mean that there is equity across all regions. You actually find quite large variations in the spend per head of population in one region compared to another, and that is across both adult and children's services.
So therefore, if you were going to look at the legal right to palliative care, you would also have to have some kind of
minimum
guidance or regulation as well, which specified what you had to do in relation to it. Is that what you're saying?
Well, from my reading, what I seem to see is that it's really great that it's been introduced and that there is a requirement to commission palliative care services, but there needs to be, as I said, a minimum specification. Either that could be in terms of spend or it could be in terms of services available, but there's not that currently, and that's why they are seeing such wide variations between regions.
Thank you. Thank you.
I mean, I actually had a similar conversation after the visit today with the clerk. So I'm aware that there is a bit of engagement. So, you know, when we're making these proposals or suggestions, or potentially making these proposals, that we have all the information about just what the implications might be with anything that we suggest. So, Keith, I don't know if you want to come in and speak to that just for a second.
Yeah, certainly, Chair. Thank you. I know it's been raised by a couple of organisations that have responded to us around the right to palliative care, and again, they've highlighted those type of issues, that while there is a statutory duty, it hasn't really been backed up with either minimum standards or guidance, which is where the gap is. And certainly I've had some conversations with UK Hospice and a few others, and in our planned visit to London, we're hoping to meet with Baroness Finlay and some other members of the all-party group on palliative care while we're there as well, who were the ones who pushed this legislation through. So it is something that we will pick up as we go along.
Okay, so I mean, I'm conscious that we're potentially getting into the detail of it. It's definitely something that we're going to look at, Colin.
Yeah, just I know I'm absolutely scraping the bottom of the barrel with this one to say, to try and find a good point about being so far behind everywhere else in the world in every services. At least we can look at other places for good examples, and I see that is on the list about sort of comparing other places. But is that going to give us not just a narrow look at maybe other places in the UK? Are we able to find somewhere that does the gold standard, and then maybe be able to compare ourselves to that to see if we're retrofitting? We've at least got the beauty in this instance of being able to see everywhere else that finds someone that does it really well. Or are we only looking at just other places in the UK?
No, my colleague Sinead McMurray is looking at global funding and commissioning of palliative and end-of-life care. I do think I don't think anywhere has it completely sussed and knows the answer to the question, but we are presenting examples of good practice, and you'll be able to see that.
You might be able to sort of pick from it.
Yeah, and pick from it. Albeit you have to caveat that with they're from different healthcare systems around the world that may have insurance-based systems, etc. So
Grania, thank you very much for your work, and we look forward to engaging with you on this over the next period of time. Appreciate that. And we're back on schedule, members. So on to item number 9, correspondence. So can I refer members just to correspondence lists at tab 9, page 156 in their table papers. Sorry, and there's more correspondence in their table papers. So correspondence begins in the main packet, page 158, and are members content with the suggested actions of the correspondence list? And that's at page 156 of the meeting pack. So obviously there's some items for noting and there's some items for action. Are people content with them as outlined?
Can I come in?
Yes, go ahead, Dan.
So just to go back to the point about the Children's Hospital, I mean, if we can't get this right, I'm like baffled by it. Yeah. So I think we should be writing back and saying, why is it still in the investment strategy at over $1 billion?
Absolutely.
It may be that it all hasn't caught up, the system hasn't caught up, but we shouldn't let that go. Can I also, there's a letter from the BMA in this, which indicates that the examination body for doctors marked examination papers or assessments wrongly, and that 200 odd doctors received the wrong results. It is signed by all the chairs of the BMA, Scotland, England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Can we ask for more detail on is there an impact in Northern Ireland on that? Seems a strange thing.
Okay, yep. That's the letter they've signed and wrote to West Drayton.
Yeah.
Okay.
And can just the last one, there is one from pharmacies, which I cannot find now, but I have had a number of representations from pharmacists who have been asked for a potentially much higher registration fee this year, a significantly higher registration fee this year. And could we just find out from the department why that is the case? Is it a departmental issue? Is it a regulatory body issue? And how is it set the way it is?
Absolutely. And you'll be aware, Dan, that next week we're having a discussion on community pharmacy. So I think we
Although
can,
that, I don't know whether this is a departmental issue. Well, I don't know. They'll certainly highlight it.
I'm happy to come in on that, Chair. I think the thing you're referring to, Diane, is there's a consultation by the Pharmaceutical Society in relation to the fees that they would charge.
Yeah.
I think it was in the pack a couple of weeks ago, so
Right.
it was. And this is a consultation that they're doing on an increase to those fees and a slightly different way on how they accept payment of fees.
Okay.
As far as I'm aware, that consultation is launched, so it is. The outcome of that will eventually be a statutory rule coming to committee.
Yes.
So that's where, as far as I know, that's the background of that, and that's where that's sitting. So we've been informed that the consultation's now live, and there is some information. I'm happy to send the document out to members. The document outlines a bit of what that additional cost relates to. I think it's essentially said that there hasn't been a change in the fee structure in 10 years possibly. And so this is the update of it, but I'm happy to send that out to members.
Well, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
and I mean, as I say, I engaged with Community Pharmacy NI last week. I mean, how they get paid and the amount they get paid is a major issue, and I expect it to cover it in great detail next week.
Yeah.
So if people are content, there's a couple of things from correspondence I just want to refer people to. So tabled correspondence, item 9.23, page 88 of tabled papers. Everybody will recall departmental officials briefed the committee on 13th of February on SL1, the draft medicine for human clinical trials amendment regulation 2024. So following the briefing, the committee wrote to the department for clarity on the distinction between the EU directive and the delegated regulation here. So that's included in that. And also, can I refer members to table correspondence item 9.24, page 90 of table papers, and it contains a response from RQIA in relation to a complaint from an individual. So essentially I'm seeking agreement to forward the response to the individual for information. Content?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So everybody's happy then with the correspondence? Good job. So moving to item 10, can I refer members to the draft forward work programme at tab 10? Can I ask everyone to note that the next meeting will be Thursday, 6th of March here, but that we have a visit arranged in the Southern Area Hospice Services in Uri for the afternoon of Wednesday, the 5th of March. So next Wednesday, that's the visit, followed by our meeting on Thursday. So members, if you please could and should advise the clerk of your availability to attend if you haven't done so, just to let us know. And then just to remind everyone again that we have a roundtable event on respite services which has been arranged for Tuesday the 11th of March from noon until 2:30, and that's in room 115, and this includes meeting with the families from the Spotlight programme and key stakeholders who will deliver services. So obviously it's a sitting day, so we'll keep our fingers crossed that business is in our favour. It's important that as many members of the committee as possible are in attendance, and again, once we see the business for that, we can confirm our availability.
Sorry, Chair, can I just check the time of that?
It's 12 to 2:30. Nuala.
Yes, can I ask, given it is a sitting day and some of us have more than one portfolio, if we could allow our researchers to go, so if we have to nip out and come back in, that they could fill us in. But also, you said stakeholders who are going to be delivering it. Is there going to be anyone from the trusts? Or is this... Because, respite is beds, primarily, and an increase in beds. And the trusts own and operate some of the lodges and the estate. So
thought behind this was to meet with the stakeholders outside, and then on Thursday we have the briefing.
I know, because the briefing's from the department, not the trusts, and the trusts are the ones where a lot of the problems have come from because of the particular respite issues. But that's fine. I just wanted to query that. We can always follow up with further written questions after
Sure.
that. If they
I have
can't
really
answer it.
bad news for people. I sit in the business committee as others do,
Yeah.
but the 11th, guess what? We have a health debate on it exactly
do.
that time from 12 through until.
And we have a plan B.
Have we planned it, and it's Diane, so we can blame Diane. So it's currently scheduled, but I mean, there could be, if any of could encourage
someone
their
to call a
minister to do a statement and then
Exactly.
we get started in that morning, it'll knock things forward an hour. So.
You want to outline plan B?
Well, yeah, I'm happy to, Chair. The original plan was that we meet with families between 12 and 1, and then lunch sort of 1 to 20 past 1, and then with the stakeholders after that. The timings at the minute is, I think the first part of the, it's Diane and Alan's, is from 12:30 to 1.
Yeah.
So if that has to go ahead, then we can sort of do the lunch break then, so we can, and then
Okay.
so we do have backup plans.
And in terms of the researchers, I mean, I'm open to. I mean, I don't see any reason why, you know, if we
It
can't
helps
come.
if we have to come and go.
I'll have to go to business committee at
Yeah.
1.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, there's no technical issue with that. So I mean, if you can't come, I mean, I see no reason why you can't have somebody representing
Okay.
you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, members. And the item number 11, any other business? None. Okay, date, time, place of next meeting, and that will be, as I've already said, Thursday, 6th of March, 2 p.m. So, Gurma.
Medication for our Leah. She's suffering. Are you
Thank
suffering?
you.
No, do you know, see earlier
Committee Room 29. Sound.